So I'm like, well, he said I'm from a very athletic family. My brother wrestled in the Olympics, so he's a wrestler. He's the head coach at Simon Fraser University right now, and I am a swimmer. I love swimming. I still swim coach for fun on the side. Um, and I'm a writer. So when my son was doing hockey, I love sports, and I was so excited that he had this sport that he loved, and it was going to be this great experience. And the more I was in it, the more I just thought, this can't be what we're supposed to be doing, and not just in the sport, but in what it did to our family life. Like my husband, we live in a ski town, so my husband was like, well, we live in a ski town so we can ski. I'm not going to spend every weekend driving all over to rink, so we all sit there while one kid plays hockey. So I said, well, I'll do it. Like if he loves it, I'm going to do it. So I was driving all over for hockey, and he was staying home and skiing with a daughter, and he and I never saw each other. Our marriage was not in great shape. We were spending a fortune. It was like, I was like, are we having fun? Is this good? I'm not sure. And so I wanted to make a space to think about that. So that's where I wrote this book, Home Ice: Reflections of a Reluctant Hockey Mom. And so I tell my very personal story, a memoir. So that's the kind of book that I like to read. It draws, I think I'm kind of self-deprecating. I say, well, it's the kind of book women like to read, but I shouldn't say that because lots of men have liked it too. But it's it's a woman's story of her own family life, and then I weave in all the research. So the research will be stuff that all of you know very well. The benefits of half ice hockey, making sure that sport is child-driven rather than parent-driven, waiting till later in the process to tier kids too much, depending on the size of the city. But yeah, waiting, not putting the emphasis on tiering and A teams until later, having kids do more multi-sport, doing less travel, making it less expensive so it's more accessible to more families, focusing on fun, waiting until kids hit puberty to get more serious. Like it was not groundbreaking information for any of you, but I thought, if I can take all that kind of stuff that academics are talking about and that people at a high level of the sport are talking about and put it in a book that a hockey mom might grab on her way through Walmart and say, well, I'm a hockey mom, I'll read this. And then maybe that'll get some of the research down to that grassroots level, because I feel at the high level, people know the benefits of multi-sport and not pushing kids too young, but at the execution in the town level, the message is not getting through. So I wrote this book, a season in our year of, I can't even remember, was it first year Adam? Something like that. And it got a really good reception right out of the gates, and I was very excited. I got first I did a event with Carl Subban because he had his How We Did It book out, and he and I hit it off, and so we started doing these tours together and stayed at Carl Subban's house, which is pretty cool. The first thing that I ever did that impressed my husband, so he was that was good. And then so we were having these little talks where we'd speak to different communities, and I felt like we were getting through. And then I was on CBC's Sunday Edition right away, and that got a lot of pickup, and the book was a bestseller. And then I felt like this is really going to start a conversation that I'm really excited to be a part of. And Jeff Turner from Hockey Canada called me, and we went out for coffee, and he said they realize that hockey's in crisis, and he's collecting ideas, and he's totally interested in my ideas. And so I felt really heard. And then it came out like this was kind of all the pre stuff, and then it came out and people in my town read it, and it was terrible. I don't know how I expected that they would react, but they reacted with great hostility. And especially the head coach, we have a little hockey academy in town, and where kids can get out early certain days a week to play hockey. And my son was in that for a while, and it wasn't a good experience for him. And I don't mean to say the whole program was bad. I just told the story of his experience, which I told particular one story. He was doing a drill and he couldn't get it. He's not particularly coordinated at a young age, and he gets really stressed out, or he used to. So he was really stressed, and the more he tried to do it, the more stressed he was. And the one coach was standing there with some other coaches, and they thought he was not getting it on purpose or something. So they were kind of laughing at him, and the more they laughed, the more frustrated he got. And then the coach took his puck and shot it down the ice and said, go get it and cool down. And he was just little, like he was 9 or something. And he had this really high sense of justice, like everything had to be fair, my son. He was really big on fairness. And he was so mad, like, why would he take my puck and shoot it down the ice? That's not fair. And he totally lost his temper. And he skated his head into the boards. He skated head first into the boards. And I was like, here's my 9-year-old son breaking his neck now. This is great. So that was the end of that. And it was just made me realize the whole point of the scene was that it took that for me to realize that more and more and more isn't always better. And it wasn't better for us. And this hockey program wasn't working for my son for a whole bunch of reasons. He was not the right kind of kid for it. He found it stressful to leave class partway through for hockey. He found it stressful to come back into class partway through for hockey. He found the drills stressful. There was nothing fun about it. And it was just me and my approach to like, oh, let's do, like, we're going to do hockey. Let's do it. And let's go for it. And so I was my like chill out moment, right? Like just take a deep breath, lady, and do what's best for your kid. So when I wrote the scene, that's how I meant it. But the coach, who wasn't identified in the passage or anything, but of course it's a small town, he was so mad, and he was writing threatening comments on my Facebook page and threatening comments on Twitter. And I was on CTV's Sunday the Social, and he wrote, if this is the kind of garbage you put, and you should see the damage she's done to her community. And so there was no talk. It was just I was a villain for having brought these things up. And I was kind of surprised naively about that reaction. But as one of my friends said to me, you have to remember, like, that's his livelihood. When you threaten people's livelihood, they get emotional. So his livelihood is running this hockey school. And when I say, well, maybe this isn't the best thing for everybody, that threatens his livelihood. So it was unpleasant in town, but everybody in town read it. That's one thing when it's controversial, is everybody will read it. So, and I'm not saying that I have the answers. I'm just saying let's rethink sport and think about who we're doing it for and what's best and what's the long game. And so I'm just hoping that it will start conversations. And I guess that's what I have to say for now.
Okay. Angie, everybody on is familiar with, the minor hockey system. I think Barry Midori is on. He's from Hockey Alberta. He's a grandpa that watches his kids in novice hockey. And Barry and I, Barry shared a story with me a year or two ago where he, observing half ice hockey and watching the coaches scream and, lose a little bit of emotional control, it was really caught him off guard. And just about every one of us has encountered that. And now your story with your boy, you describe really well his sensitivity in the book. That's your child, that's him, that's his personality. And average coaches might just totally overlook that and react versus handle it like a professional educator. And that's one of the problems in communication with coaches. Their intentions are good to begin with, but it takes a degree of understanding and education to be a more open and responsive teacher. And I'm just going to ask Jordan Fenton and that story relative to the academy, and Bobbi Jo Sluzar is on as well. Jordan was principal at Chestermere High School at the time. They have an academy. And Bobbi Jo was running the ice. She's a former national team player. And Jordan, I wonder if you can relate to that relative to your academy and the experience of the kids that participated in it. And I know I worked for you a couple times, and they weren't that serious about it. It's a high school academy, and I thought they'd be a little more motivated, but it appeared to be just let's have a good time, and it's a time out of the classroom. So Jordan or Bobbi, can you mention, try to tie in your experience at that level within academy?
Well, I will just start talk a little bit about the start of the program there, and then I'll let Bobbi Jo talk about it, because I've been away from there for, 3 years now. And so it's the reason for starting it was not as an elitist academy or anything like that. What it was to pair like interests for students that with academics and athletics. And so we have a certain portion of our population in our school, of course, that's passionate about the game. And my belief in a school is that every student should feel connected to the building in one reason or another. And we had this whole portion of our population that their biggest passion wasn't represented, and in a community where it could be. So I also have had my own moral quandary with the monetization of the game and how we see that hockey has become an expensive sport. So we were looking to run that academy as that program at such an economic portion that it wasn't going to eliminate people. And so we basically looked at it. Of course, I had the luxury as the administrator of looking at people when we're hiring for positions that could do both. That could be a teacher, but also could take on a hockey program. So I was very fortunate and able to find Bobbi Jo, who's a former national team player, as Wally had said, to come in and take over that program and kind of make it her own at a cost that was basically the cost of transporting kids from our school to the rink and the cost of the ice time, because our teacher cost is already being covered through our school budget, and the students were earning credits towards their high school graduation by participating in the program. So that's where the program started from, and I can let Bobbi Jo talk more about the program and that piece now.
Just for Angie's sake, Jordan, I wanted to mention Bobbi Jo taught classes. She's a formal educator, which means, went to university and studied to be a teacher. And she's an athlete as well. So with that understanding, I think that's sort of the issue of the problem, whether your hockey academy coach was a teacher or an educator or had any kind of that kind of experience. We really don't know. But that's sort of one of the parts of the thing that I think I would bring up here. So,
And I
Bobbi
like
Jo,
Wally. I just want to Wally, just before I forget what you said about the coach acting like an educator and seeing that this child was very sensitive at this age and putting that into his programming is such a great idea. And I really thought of that when you gave me that evaluation form for the hockey thing. And one of the questions was, does the coach see every child? And I really keep that in my mind now that I'm back coaching and back on deck, and I have to hold myself to the same standard as I hold everyone else to. And a lot of the children have anxiety and have sensitivity right now and have different issues. And I find I have to treat every child differently. And not that we don't push them hard and make them work hard and, make them learn things and all of that, but you do have to respond to them where they're at, especially in these challenging times when there is a lot of anxiety. So yeah, thank you for reminding me of that point.
Bobbi?
Yeah. Oh goodness, I don't even know where to start. When I took over, when I came into the school at Chestermere High School, Jordan had started the program and had it running, I thought, quite well. And fortunately, I was lucky enough for him to be the administrator, and so he would definitely mentored me during that process. And I think for me as an athlete and playing, at the national team level, there's a tremendous amount of, I think, intensity at that level and pressure and all of those things. And so when I did come into Chestermere High School, my last memories of playing were at, the highest level that I had played at. And so it did take me a while to adjust with, how to come into a class environment where we were not a team. And so that was challenging for me. And I remember Jordan reminding me a few times that this isn't necessarily a team. So you're not going to focus on systems and those types of things. But what would be great is if you continue to develop skill, to do those small area games, to play and let these individuals have fun and develop their own skill through that process. And so for me, I had to kind of dial back the intensity because right away I was excited to coach. But because, of just starting my teaching career and being able to do the hockey as well, during that time, it was a challenge for me at times. And I was really, really fortunate to be coaching with Jordan at that time and Wally, you mentoring us at that time. And I think since then I have adjusted. Each year has gotten a little bit easier. And so, even though it's been a COVID year and a lot of challenges for everybody, this year was an awesome year because a lot of the kids were only practicing or not playing at all and just not having anything to do with the game this year. And so what I wanted to do was just have fun and just have, and that's what it's about in the end, is that you take a look at each student and each person, and you just try to get something out of them or have them feel something through it. And I really felt this year, even though it was a COVID year, that allowed me to sort of take a look at each person, because we're all going through challenges mentally as well as physically, not being able to do our normal routines. And so I think that's a nice teaching point, is that, especially with Jordan, is that I was able to sort of adjust and have the support of Wally and Jordan during those first couple of years. And I've slowly felt that the process of, because it was a struggle at first, with so many skill levels and people and individuals that didn't really care, and that was their time to just relax for the first time in their school day. And now I feel like it's gotten better and better each year with even skill development and where these kids are at. But I think it's just been more and more fun for me. And so that's what it comes down to. Angie, when you're talking about your son, and I have 2 little girls now, and when they start to go into sports, I really need to remind myself that it's about them and the process for them, and making it a great experience. So I do feel fortunate that I am able to teach and do the hockey as well. And hopefully those little reminders will keep jumping back, because that's what it's all about.
And one of the challenges, I would say, that probably Bobbi Jo has faced over it, but it isn't, I guess it's a testament to her teaching and that, and where the program was aimed, was about the whole idea that it didn't matter the skill level that a child had coming onto the ice. They were building their own individual skill. So, and I know that Wally had mentioned that it wasn't elite. Well, the other part to it was that that didn't mean that there weren't elite players in it, and that they didn't get anything from it. Because Bobbi Jo had players that continued on to play Alberta Junior League, and on to post-secondary after that. Like there's players that played in both ACAC and NCAA, and some that probably will be playing U Sport. But there's also kids that went through her program that I run into at the rink, and they're just happy continuing to play the sport because they love it. And it was because, I think partially because they got to be reunited with their passion while part of their school day. So that's where the program went. But that's
Tim, you got your hand up, and Angie, you had yours up, but I'll let Tim speak first if you don't mind. Tim?
Well, we want to hear from her. Go ahead. I just had a
go ahead.
question for her, so if she wants to go ahead, that's fine.
Okay, Angie.
Actually, this is embarrassing. I was trying to do a thumbs up to Bobbi Jo. I wasn't even trying to put my hand up. So.
Thank you.
Well, thumbs up acknowledged.
Angie, I see Sammy's on. Both of you have been on a call talking about books and whatnot. Welcome, Sammy. Good to have you.
Good
Go
to see
ahead,
everyone.
Okay.
So, Angie, very nice to meet you, and thanks for coming on. I was just wondering, I'm going to have to jump off in about 15, 20 minutes and maybe back on later, but could you kind of summarize, like, what are your takeaways from this in terms of, do you or your husband have any particular ideas about, like, how your experience and or your son's experience could have been improved or better? I think the mention about, the coaches having actual teaching experience would be great, but of course we all know in the hockey world that it's going to be pretty widespread that that's not the case. So that's kind of a given, and maybe it should be some kind of a rule for if you want to start a hockey academy. But so just in a nutshell, like what are your 2 or 3 or 1 main takeaways and or your husband's that would have been better for you as parents and for your son as kids?
I think that families have to be vigilant about making sure they have a balanced attitude towards youth sports, and making sure they're advocating for their own children, and making sure they're keeping an eye on how things are working. And I think too often we all just get pulled along with the machinery. And so we enter into hockey and it just sort of gets a little bit out of perspective and a little bit too intense and a little bit, not about the fun or not about the kids or just focusing on the good kids at such a young age. And I think parents need to make sure that's not happening, because what happens is, well, as Wally likes to say, the lunatics are running the asylum. In a small town, the parents who are the most intense and the most convinced their kids are going to the NHL at age 6, they're the ones who grab the reins, and so they're doing all the work. They're doing the raffle tables, they're washing the jerseys, they're booking the ice time, and then you feel like, oh, I can't really complain because they're doing everything. I think everybody needs to get more involved, including the parents with a more moderate attitude, and I think that would keep things in check. Like Wally said, I think people are there with good intentions and they start with good intentions, and we just have to keep checking in with each other. Is this about fun? Are the kids getting a multi-sport introduction to sports? Is everybody getting fair ice time? Are people learning the basic skills? And not, remember, the NHL is way down the road. And then the other thing is the training for coaches. Because I've just recently gone back to swimming, I'm having to redo my certification for Swim Canada, and it's all about this kind of stuff. The NCCP level 1 and level 2 is all about being sensible. I mean, it's called this being sensible, right? Remembering children are children, letting children have childhood, making sure the sport's about them, not about the parents living vicariously. So yeah, be vigilant at the family level and not let someone else run away with it and just get pulled along. I think too many people get pulled along into the craziness.
Happy birthday, Sammy.
Require parental instruction as much as coaching instruction, and I guess,
yeah.
I mean, we kind of know that. I guess how do we crack that nut? Short of demanding all parents attend sort of a informational session about, fairness, development for all, fun, at whatever level, whether it's at all levels in minor hockey or whether it's, below Bantam AAA where it gets to be more elite. But, I don't know how else to crack that nut.
Yeah, I'm writing a series of articles for Active for Life. If you just Google Active for Life, Angie Abdou, you'll come up with a page. But it's just, I'm interviewing Olympians, and then every month I do an Olympian, and then I pull out parenting lessons. And so far the ones published have been Carol Wynn on wrestling, and Martha McCabe on swimming, and who was my first one? Shame on me for forgetting. But they just pull out these exact kind of lessons. And so Active for Life is really on it. And I think there's lots of the hockey conference that happened at University of Alberta last time, but they're really on it. So I feel like there's these little groups that are trying to educate people. The problem is, does the average hockey parent sitting in the stands, are they reading the Active for Life articles or reading the academic articles or reading the kinds of things you guys are talking about? Probably not. So how, like you say, how do we filter that down other than making mandatory education programs, which might just be laughed at, or pamphlets? I guess you just keep putting the message out there and hope that eventually enough people catch on that that's the mass, right? Like just keep, what did Richard Monet, who's the head of Active for Life, he talked about that the vocal minorities running the show. He said most people want this for their kids. They want a healthy sport environment. They want multi-sport. They want to, not put pressure on until much later. But the vocal minority is the one running the show. So I think the more people we can get involved and have that majority who just wants a healthy, balanced sport experience for their kids running the show, instead of letting the few grab the reins.
I guess kind of like coaching a team with kids at all different skill levels. And we've often talked about, you got to coach the parents, and repetition is the biggest piece.
Yeah, and I do for swimming, we do a monthly newsletter. So I've started linking on these sport parent, even though I do the sport parent rules for Active for Life and it with a very, very different hat on, I just keep linking those in. And I think if that's the culture and that's the message, then parents do get embarrassed to act like, lunatics. They're just, when the general message is let's all be sane and balanced and have fun and treat children like children, the ones who are getting to get too caught up, they get a bit, they get held in check just by the general culture. So I just keep putting the message out there however I can.
Bobbi Jo's hands up. Yeah. Oh no, pardon me. Angie, I just wanted to mention you did the mission statement exercise with me, and then we've had 2 or 3 conversations following that. And in my books, and Barry Midori is on as well. That's the piece that in 1990 we're hoping to see we can get re-implemented, ethical coaching applied through coaches as they go up the education ladder. I really think that's the only way you're going to make a lasting impact over time. Now, Kim, you had your hand up. I'd sure like to hear what you've got there. Sound, Kim, you got to turn your sound on.
Yeah, I'm only 500 Zoom calls in. I should be good at this by now. Hi, Angie. I'm Kim McCullough. I'm from Toronto. I read your book in 2 days, which I'm giving myself a pat on the back because I have 3 kids, 6 and under. So, I may have paid more attention to your book than them for a day or two. That's okay. But I'm the head of hockey operations at Leaside Girls Hockey, which is one of the biggest girls hockey associations in the world. And I got that job at the beginning of the pandemic, so it's been interesting. But and I've been at Leaside since I was 13 years old. So I played at a relatively high level and have been coaching here for 12 years. And I do read 2 books every week. Thank you.
Excellent.
I think what you said was the engagement and the communication side I found has always been powerful in my career. So I'm not an educator by trade. I don't have an education degree, but I've been coaching hockey for a pretty long time. And I think my secret sauce in being able to have a great culture has always been communication. So to your point about newsletters, I send out a monthly newsletter through Leaside with topics, relating to culture or coach development or player development. And I feel like I'm constantly seeding our culture and watering it every single time I send that out or in every communication I send out. And, to give you an idea, I've coached minor hockey, I guess at the highest levels for girls for 13 years. And I've always sent a weekly email every Monday with a little quote and a little idea of our schedule for the week. And, part of it is, me engaging the parents so they know what's happening in addition to my players. But also, you're reinforcing culture. And, I did the mission statement exercise with Wally as well. And I'd say every month I kind of put the mission statement at the top of the email and allude to it. So, we haven't played a single game this year. We only had 40 practices and we've been locked down since November. But everyone's still engaged and that culture is still growing. So for me, it's now taking that culture I've been able to develop for 12 or 13 years and now do it with an entire hockey association. So, that I think that parental engagement, like you said, you post the articles, you send the newsletters, and you hope people read it. But I think even the fact that you're doing it and sending it says a lot about the culture. So irrespective of whether people actually engage with it, the fact that you do it sets you apart. And, people know it's there. It's kind of a comfortable thing that they know. For us, I've created a ton of content that's only accessible by people within Leaside. So it's password protected. And so that also adds to the culture piece, I think, a little bit too. Like it's their little hub of where they can go to and get more information and inspiration. So I think that's really helping too. But in my experience, it's the constant engagement. I'm not answering text messages from parents 2 a.m, and I wouldn't do that. But I am constantly reinforcing culture through those weekly messages or those monthly newsletters. I really think that's the key, because in mentoring minor hockey coaches, most of the times they've taken a wrong turn has been because they didn't have a mission statement. They didn't set sort of the rules of engagement down. They weren't reinforcing the culture. It had nothing to do with how people could skate or whether they could break out or run the power play. It was always, driven kind of by the culture side of it, which, of course, in reading your book, I came up against it again and again. I'll
That
stop
sounds
blabbering.
amazing.
Sorry.
That sounds amazing what you're doing. And the other thing I find is once you start emphasizing culture, everyone, the athletes and the parents, become aware of all the things that the athletes are doing that have nothing to do with winning or losing, how they're learning how to be positive, how they're learning how to work with teammates, how they're learning work ethic, how they're learning how to rebound from disappointment or failure. And the emphasis can be on all those life skills they're learning that go so far beyond the game. And that maybe takes a little bit of the crazy out of the emphasis on winning.
Tom Molloy. Turn your speaker on, Tom. There you go. While we're waiting for Tom to get his speaker on, Angie, Kim is a full-time employee of the Leaside Association, and she's been with them for a number of years, but she's managed to put herself in a position of being sort of a program director, coach director, culture director, and doing a great job at it. So I'm looking forward to all the work she's doing and where it's going and seeing some results come from it. But it's tremendous to have somebody with her educational background and her hockey background having the perspective that you need in an association and making a difference like that. So I don't know.
My speaker's on now, Wally.
Okay, you're on, Tom.
Okay, I think I come from quite a different perspective. I taught 34 years, right from little kids to college, and I spent 22 of the years in junior high school. But I helped co-author a program with a Hall of Fame Finnish guy, Johanni Wallston, and the theme of our program is enjoy the game, and the game is the greatest coach. And they started the Edge School here, Brent DeVoe School for Sports, and he wanted my son to play. So what happened is I said, well, I don't have $35,000 to pay for my son to play, and I was coaching the Mount Royal women, and so to pay for his tuition, I did the skills in the morning 3 days a week for 2 years, and so that was a different perspective because those kids, they have more of an ambition to be players. And then this Tony Dawson got me to do the Hockey Canada hockey program with his junior high school. And then I'd have kids that are playing Bantam AA, AAA, and then some kids that had never skated before, all on the ice at the same time. There was just one group. So that was a totally different perspective. The way, you go ahead about that. And I coached in the sports school in Salzburg, and I had the under-17 team. And there was kids, I helped with the other teams, but I was a head coach of that one. So there's kids there that want to be pros, and some kids, like you're speaking in English, and some kids don't know what you're doing and this kind of stuff. And then for 8 summers, I did Koreans that came here, and what they would do is they would get good athletes and bring them with them that had never skated before, and they'd practice with the team. And we're in the ice 2-hour practices a day, 6 days a week for 4 weeks, so 96 hours on the ice. But then they get the kids that just started, and they take them on the oval for 2 hours and just practice skating with them. And that's a absolutely, totally different way to do things. And if kids didn't listen and practice, and apparently they don't do this anymore, but if kids didn't listen and practice, they had to stand with their hands against the boards, leaning forward while a coach beat them in the rear end with his stick. So that's, a little bit different than our culture, but that was in the mid 80s, early 90s. So apparently I talked to Jim Pock, and he said they don't do that kind of stuff anymore there. And so I think that it just depends what group you get, right? If you get a group that wants to be players, or the group that just like at the school there that Bobbi Jo's teaching at, you have that whole variety of kids. And, you also have to be careful that you don't do what they did to your son there and insult him in front of everybody like that. So anyways, that's my 2 bits worth. So
My
go ahead.
brother, when you talk about the things that how people used to treat athletes and what people used to do or say, my brother and I, he's the head coach at Simon Fraser, and we have kind of an ongoing text thing where we'll say, "Are you still allowed to do this?" And we'll just do some memory of something someone said or did, and it's always like, I can't believe the way things used to be in the 80s or 90s. And my last one was, are you still allowed to say, "You are so stupid, what do I have to do? Take my brain out of my head and put it in your head"? Because that's something this Russian coach used to say all the time, this Russian coach who was in Montreal. So no, not anymore. You're not allowed to. Although my brother wrote back, he said, "I think you're still allowed to do that one. I mean, it's just a question." So no, but no, you're not. Yeah, times have definitely changed for the better. So as much as we can say how things still need work, we're obviously moving in the right direction.
Angie, in your book, you described a situation where the coach, I don't know if he hit him on the head with his stick, but that's very recent at a practice. And 6 years ago in Cochrane, mentoring a novice team, and I was on the bench observing, tracking feedback, reinforcing positive feedback, and really looking at it, getting them to be aware of how they communicated. And the 2 teams that were playing were both from Cochrane, but they were ranked 1 and 2 in their division of, I believe it was novice hockey. Everything went perfectly well until the score got close and it was near the end of the game. And one of the coaches actually shouted to a kid, "What are you, brain dead?"
Oh dear.
And I addressed it with them after the game. And the way I addressed it wasn't, I was pretty direct because I'd been there trying to make them aware of what they were doing. And it ended up actually over a little period of time of not mentoring anymore because it made them uncomfortable. And that's part of the problem with coaches not knowing what they don't know and learning about what they're doing and being aware of what they're doing and changing the way they operate. But, that's the reality of the minor hockey system. Volunteer coaches, good intentions, trying their best, and communicating in that kind of a fashion. And to you and me, it was shocking. And it's something that shouldn't happen. And I can reiterate many, many stories like that over the past 10 years that I've been witness to that needed to be addressed. So, and I think that's sort of what everybody here is aware of. And I always remind them that we want to change the game so the game's, better for everyone. And that's the intention of it. So, anybody else? Go ahead.
I have a really short question. How come hockey coaches are always volunteer? Is it just to keep it more affordable? Like I know the swim club, which is what I'm more involved with, the coaches are paid pretty well, but hockey coaches are always volunteer, right? And kind of parent coaches typically. I guess that's to make it affordable. Yeah.
It depends on where you're at, Angie, and what level, which I also think is maybe not correct in the way we do it. But, in Toronto, certainly coaches who coach at a elite level are typically paid certainly on the guy's side and also on the female side. Certainly not, as I like to call it, Mike Babcock money, which is probably incorrect to use him as an example anymore. But, we're not paid a living wage to coach, but we are paid and therefore held, I think, to a higher standard, which is good because you are being paid. But I wanted to kind of hit on what Wally said about, the comment that coach made, because, I look at it now as a bigger picture now that I'm in charge of player development and coach development. Like to me, that could be a mistake. Like I know, and I'm not saying it's right, but I have definitely used words and language at times that I don't think is appropriate, or that if I thought about what I said 5 or 10 years ago, I would be appalled at what came out of my mouth. And, could we treat that in the same way, a mistake, the same way we might treat a mistake on the ice? Like, could that coach apologize and receive some mentorship about how to do it the correct way? And it makes me think of the referee in the NHL who got fired this week because of what he was caught on tape saying, and that's a separate issue. But I do wonder sometimes, on these culture pieces, if there isn't someone there to mentor or say, you obviously can't say that, but we need to talk about how to do it differently. Like I'll constantly have parents say, well, you shouldn't say, hey guys, come over here, because I'm not coaching guys. Well, that is true, right? But that might take me a bit to change that languaging, right? In the same way it might take a coach some time to stop swearing, just in general, not necessarily at players, but just using those types of words. So I think, especially if it's a volunteer, but also if it's a paid coach, you want to set expectations of culture, but, you want to hold them to account. But I don't know that it can always be a hard and fast rule of the way we, where we draw the line and what's okay and what's not okay. And are we willing to teach and develop those coaches in the way that we are willing to teach and develop our players? I don't have the answers, but I do think as a longtime coach, I do think we have to sometimes give them the benefit of the doubt and hope that they will change in the way that we hope some of our players would change as well.
Kim, I just wanted to mention before getting Bobby Louts to speak, when you mentioned that, I suddenly dawned on me, I didn't approach that the right way. If I had used a questioning process and asked them to think about how they responded at that point in the game, what they thought of it and what they might do differently, using that inquiry method, and Angie, we're trying to educate coaches today to ask more questions and get the answers that, as opposed to me telling them and being a little bit more emotional about it and losing their trust and respect. So thanks very much for that, Kim. Really, mentoring is something that's been advocated. Hockey Canada's created a course, but the program has not gotten off the ground over the past 10 years that it was intended. So, Bob Louts, go ahead.
No, I didn't have my hand up, Wally. Did you want me
Okay,
to?
I saw BL with a hand up. So, anybody
No.
else? Any other questions? Sami Jo, I'm curious about your take on all this, being so involved with kids. Any of your kids playing hockey yet, or are they too young?
So we have a 5-year-old, and we take care of our 5-year-old niece. So 2 girls, and both dislike hockey. However, we have got them to skate, and we think in our household, skating, swimming, and gymnastics are really good just bases for anything else. So it has, at times it's a struggle because hockey takes mom and dad outside of the house. So hockey has different connotations, probably like for Kim's kids. It just is it's a different psyche for them. Hockey represents mom and dad leaving. But that's not to say, they're only 5. So we got lots of time. But what has been a really interesting thing for me as a parent is, having grown up as a tomboy, feeling like girls should have every opportunity to succeed. And now I have a daughter who loves to dance and do gymnastics. And it is exactly the opposite of what I would have wanted, we'll say, as a parent. So when I was giving speeches before I was a parent, I would always say, I was so grateful for my parents because they were not hockey people. And they got me into a sport simply because I had a smile on my face when I played it. That's why they allowed me to play. And that's why they encouraged me to play. So now to see your own child find their passion, there's nothing better. And I never would have thought that I would have become a dance mom. But that is my world now. So last night, Billy and I figured out on YouTube how to make a ballet bun. I don't even know how to comb my own hair, let alone somebody else's. So anyways, that's what my parents went through. And I grew up in a swimming family and I was the only hockey player. So this was something totally different. But the question I had for Angie was that, growing up in swimming and growing up in track and field, it was a lot of one-on-one time with the coaches. And so I always felt in more of a cocoon with the coaches, more of a rapport. Whereas when I went to play hockey or maybe a team sport, often players are you fall through the cracks. There's so many of them. The coach is trying to create culture, but there's not the one-on-one interaction. And all of my favorite coaches that I've ever had have come through sports that have more of that. So how do we translate what happens in those individual sports? Because I love that. I love that rapport. How do we get that into hockey? Is it having more coaches and maybe having each coach take 5 children really under their wing? Or what are some ideas that you have translated or think could be translated?
So I've been thinking about this in swimming lately because I came onto the team because there was a crisis. A coach left. We're in the middle of COVID, nobody, et cetera, et cetera. So I just jumped in, and I could tell the kids are flat. They haven't been to a meet since last March. They are lacking motivation. And my first thing I said is we need to sit down with each of these kids, like have a sheet and say, what are your goals? What do you want to achieve this year? What are you going to do it? How can I help you do it? What are you at swimming for? What kind of culture is it that makes you want to come here? Like get them to fill out a sheet and have a little one-on-one dialogue. So I think it's so important that athletes feel seen and heard, and that's part of what they come to sport for. They have another adult who's a pseudo parent in those years that they're pulling away from their parent, or at least a role model and a confidant, like not a confidant, a role model and someone to talk to and someone to get advice from. So I really want to foster that one-on-one relationship with all my swimmers. And it is a big group. And to do that, I have to pull them out one at a time. And I have to find a way to make time for that, whether I show up at practice half an hour early each day and take one-on-one or two kids for a walk and talk to them during a walk before practice, or however I need to carve out that time, because it doesn't just happen naturally to have the one-on-one time. It does when you're at a meet and you talk to each one after the race, but the way it is right now, there are no meets. So I've really been thinking about how to make that happen. And I want to have each one have kind of like a mission statement like Wally talks about, but I'd be really interested to hear what Kim has to say about how to make that happen. I bet you make a way to talk to each of your athletes one-on-one.
Yeah, I can talk about that. Sorry, I'm being climbed upon now. This is the 3 and 4 year old. Yeah, I think one thing I started doing a couple years ago is every month I would have these like very simple feedback forms that I would hand out to everybody on the team. And it would be, the format is give yourself a score out of 10 on your performance this month, whatever that is relative to you. Give the team a score on their performance this month. So I explained to them before we do the first one, it's not necessarily, wins and losses. We actually started in the summer before the season starts. So they're grading their performance in their off-season training or off-season skills. So that kind of sets the stage that it's not just based on wins and losses. And then I have them say, what do you think are 2 things the team did well? What are 2 things you think you did well? And 2 things you want to work on? And I've done that consistently every month. So usually I get 8 of those reports throughout the season, and I just staple them together and write the month on it. But it allows me, when I am able to have individual meetings, and with 18 players, it can't be as frequent as I would like. But it does a couple things. One, it tells me how they see themselves. So if I think the kid was a 9 out of 10 that month, but she writes down 3, that's a red flag for me. And then that might give me a way to initiate a meeting that player wouldn't necessarily say to me, I feel like a 3, but if she puts it on the paper and it's a little safer because she doesn't have to say it, then that would be a red flag, right? It's one of my best players. She's been playing great, but she thinks she's a 3. Why, how do we initiate that conversation? It also allows me to see where they think the team is. So even if the team's not doing well or they are doing well, are we a 6 out of 10? Are we a 9 out of 10? What do they see? But where I really, kind of focus in on is the things they think they've done well and the things they want to work on. And I actually keep that I track that for each player. So I have a separate sheet for each player. And every month I write down, what are the things they think they're doing well and or what are the things they want to improve on. And so then, I've got this list of the things everyone wants to improve on. And now you've got, 2 points for 18 players. And that all goes on a sheet that goes to me and my assistant coaches every month. And then they can say, oh, Sally really wants to work on her pass reception. And that to me becomes, those are the self-identified key points that those players want to work on for their performance. Sometimes they're not hockey related. Sometimes it's, I want to work on my mental toughness. I mean, it's still hockey related, but it's not skill related. But I make sure to put that in the hands of all my assistant coaches. So as Sammy alluded to, you put it, in their hands, and often they are the ones who are a little bit more interacting because I'm trying to run the whole practice. So I found that to be really powerful. Then we're all on the same page and we can all communicate to those athletes about those little key points. And then we might do things like written reports to the athletes, as well as individual meetings. So usually every month or two, we're doing some sort of back and forth communication. It's not always, a 15-minute meeting, because that's not really realistic in the minor hockey scenario. But I have tried to up my communication because that's the feedback I need most. And I'm being strangled, so please give me a moment.
Kim, I'd like to mention what you said here. The first thing that dawned on me was I had a conversation with Lisa Haley. And Angie, Lisa's coaching at Ryerson, presently coaching the female team, Team Hungary Hockey. She's coached, I think, at 2 Olympics with the national program. And she's not a hockey player per se herself, although she played the game at that level. And she's writing materials for Hockey Canada on ethical coaching modules. And she was sharing with me, and this is where, Kim, your statement, the kids, your swimmers being seen and heard and having to talk to them. So she's developed, and she was quite excited about it, an evaluation form for evaluators watching high performance coaches. And I shared with her the story of it's not the form and your evaluation that matters, it's how they evaluate themselves. And that engages them. So what I've done, and I told her, whatever form you prepared, have them do it themselves and then have your conversation with them. But don't evaluate them and grade them without hearing how they evaluate themselves and truly think about what they've done. And that's where the questioning and the reading of yourself, and if they've scored too low, you've got work to do. If they scored higher than you think, you've got a conversation to have. And that aspect of communication and filling out forms is not to put down the player or put down the coach, which it does. It puts them on their heels. It makes them defensive. So the idea and the art of communication and the inquiry method is something that hopefully we can get better at, getting coaches to become familiar with doing it in their coaching, but also governing bodies and evaluating and assessing them, make it more of a self-awareness, self-assessment kind of activity. So.
And I think when I mentioned earlier, like the idea of going to practice early and each time trying to make a time to go for a walk with 1 or 2 of the athletes, once in a while to hear from them. My idea is that as teenagers, if you sit down and say we're having a meeting down and look them in their face, they're going to sometimes say what you want to hear, or they're going to be nervous, or they're going to be shy. Whereas when you're walking and not looking at each other, you can hear, they loosen up and they might tell you how they're really feeling about stuff. And I think Kim's idea of having them fill in the form accomplishes the same thing, because they take it away and think about it and do the form. And what you're talking about too, Wally, these are skills that we're teaching them that they take far beyond sport: how to reflect, how to draw conclusions, how to ask for what you need, how to communicate clearly. These are so much more important than hockey or swimming, and that's what we're in a position to teach them.
Super. Anything else out there? Any other questions?
I was just gonna, can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
There we go. Sorry, I was just going to jump in and applaud Kim on exactly what you're doing. I think, you know, as a teacher and somebody who's kind of running or helping with a hockey program within my school, I think with COVID too, and just mental health, I've been doing a similar thing for the last 2-3 years, where I call it kind of a health journal. And what I do is with my hockey sports performance program, I'm looking at a couple of different things, and like on a scale of 1 to sort of 10, and I'm quite specific with 1 being the most enjoyable, 10 being really that struggle or something that's just on that far spectrum, something that you're not doing well or not, it's not going well for you. And so I look at training or playing enjoyment, confidence, risk-taking, focus, health, irritability, rest, quality of sleep, because I'm finding teenagers, and I think with social media and everything right now, a lot of my students are not sleeping and they're not eating, and they're just, their brain, I talk about kind of flipping this lid and how our logic and our emotions are just totally disconnected. And I think as teenagers, with everything going on, just trying to find your own identity and who you are, there's so many pieces. So I've really enjoyed this, because within that, you do the total feeling state for that day or that week. I try to do it now every 2 weeks, because I find that seems to be the most manageable. But I'm also looking at, you know, asking them different questions. What are things that you are doing well? And there's specific questions that I've asked depending on the week. And then enjoyment, of course, but also anything you want to see, because I do feel that you guys are all right in talking about, you know, giving individuals a little bit of a voice, you know, as coaches and teachers, and we tend to, you know, oftentimes we're telling them, you know, this is what's going to happen. And I think allowing them a voice and to kind of contribute, you know, the buy-in process becomes a lot greater for them, I think. And so if they can, you know, get that down on paper, sometimes it's a little bit easier than conversations. And I think as a teacher and just a person in society, I'm really, really cognizant of, you know, our social media devices. And when I look out in the hallways and I see these high schoolers, you know, talking to each other, but not really, they're distracted, they're on their phones. You know, that face-to-face is becoming more and more challenging. And so if you can't do that face-to-face, I think it's a great idea to get some things down on paper and to allow them to reflect on the whole learning process and what they're going through. So great job, Kim, and the rest of you as well.
Bobbi Jo, I had a talk with Danielle Goyette yesterday. The U of C coaches the female hockey team. And Danielle received from Dan Church, he's the head coach at York University female team. He shared a sport psychologist, a mental health psychologist, really doing formal sessions. And her team, there are going to be 8 one-hour sessions related to exactly what you're doing. They don't have games. They are beginning to practice again. And she said they've had 2 sessions, and it's all about the influence of the technological world in the lives and how it might really inhibit their awareness and their growth and development. And exactly that. And it's a real credit to Danielle for buying into it. They're formally into the program, and Dan Church sharing it with all CIS female coaching staffs, something that's available. And they're, you know, looking for things to do. Now they're on the ice, they're quite happy, but talking about things that are more important than the score clock, for sure. Bob, did you have a...
Yeah, I agree with everything that's being said here. I think that because as a coach, you only get so many hours in a day to be with your players. I think it's very important that you're at the rink before they are and you're leaving after they leave. That gives you an opportunity to speak to 2 or 3 kids every day. Also during practice, I think it's important that the head coach does not run the whole practice. I think for a number of reasons, I think your assistant coaches have to be empowered. But at that time gives you a good opportunity to go around and talk to a couple of players on the ice about hockey-specific things, where off the ice you may talk about more personal things where you're building a relationship with them. I really found that over the course of all the years that I coached, that players really want to know that you care about them more than they care what you know about hockey. And I think if you don't build a good relationship with the players, they never will open up to you fully. And I think it's really, really important to build that relationship that's not a coach-player relationship, but more, I don't know if I would call it a mentor, but at least somebody that they feel comfortable with. They know that you care about them. If you've heard that their sister's sick or their grandma's sick, like, you need to go talk to them about that. Or how's your sister doing? It doesn't have to be hockey, and most often it shouldn't be hockey. I really think that building that time within however many hours you have with them, you need to think about that, and you need to make sure that you're having some kind of a contact with every single player every day that they're there.
Angie, swimming, are you paid for your coaching position?
I'm unmuting myself. It is a paid position. When I stepped in this year, I've said I would do it volunteer, partly because I was on the board. And so if I got paid, I'd have to get off the board. And at the time, it was supposed to be sort of a short-term solution. So it's normally they get paid $30 an hour or something. And so for whatever, 20 hours a week. So it's not a livable wage, but normally they do pay. So I'm saving the club some money in these hard times, and I'm doing it totally volunteer. But I was just thinking I was going to do it this year, but now I remember that I love it. So I want to keep doing it. But I would like to be able to do it volunteer because it's not my main job, and I don't know. But it is a paid job typically.
Yeah.
I just love that you said, now I remember that I loved it.
I love it so much. It's like I do this thing where I fluctuate back and forth between like athletics and creativity, and I need to find a way, like I can be a writer and a coach, or a writer and an athlete, and I'm always trying to balance those two. Oh, I love it. Like, I love everything about it. I love working with teenagers. I love it. They're so interesting, and they're just so responsive to people other than their parents. Like, I will say sometimes to some of my friends whose kids are on the team, I'll be like, wow, I love working with your daughter. She's so, when I give her technique feedback, she responds like this, and she's so polite, and they're like, our daughter, like, that's not what we're seeing at home right now. So it's really nice for them to know that even though their teenagers are going through this phase where they're grumpy and miserable at home, they're lovely human beings out in the world. And I just love it. I love everything about it. I love swimming. So to be able to share my passion for a sport with teenagers at a time that it's really going to get them through some rough years, if they can stick with it, I just love it. Yeah.
Bob, the point you made, and I'm not sure if it's a guy thing, we get caught up in the outcome, in the coaching. And the time that you're talking about is so important. But the majority of the thoughts we have as coaches, and I may be generalizing too much here, but as male coaches, is the outcome and not the process. It's the score clock in the end, and doing the X's and O's to get the best result.
Wally, I agree with you there, and I think the biggest problem is when guys come on as volunteer coaches, it's usually with their kids because they think they can do a better job than what somebody else is doing, or they come on because they want to be a coach and they think the only way they're going to get to be a top level coach is to win. So the winning is either I win for my child to get him better, and I'm going to play him a lot or her a lot and make sure that they get developed, or I'm going to build my record so that I can move up in the ranks. So I think that they forget about all the things on that journey that's going to get them, the players, everybody to that different level. And to me, it was never about winning, and I've won a lot. It was never about winning. It was always the process. And it started, you assumed that they knew nothing and you taught them from the ground up. And you made sure that they felt good about themselves. If they don't have a good self-esteem and feel like they're part of the team's going nowhere. And as a coach, if your team succeeds, they don't necessarily even have to win a championship. You have to show improvement. You have to show all the things that it takes to win, you've got to emulate that. You've got to be a role model. The team has to get better. The kids have to have fun. I mean, it's a multi-level thing where you're going to rise to the top. And I don't think there's one specific answer, but certainly, you've got to build relationships with players, and it's the only way you're going to have success. If you just come in there and treat them like they're the object, and here's what we got to do to win, I don't think you're going anywhere.
Bob, I understand what you're saying. You use the term rise to the top. And to me, I think of, if you really want to be successful, when you're done in sports, you just want to have personal qualities that you've developed over your lifetime to be at the top of whatever you're doing, the best you can be.
Right.
So the talking about winning championships and whatnot, and we've got people who have been on gold medal teams here at the Olympics. They understand the purpose of that, and the satisfaction comes from what you've learned from your experience, striving to be the best you can be. And in minor hockey, the striving to be the best you can be may lead to championships. It may not, but the focus of what you're doing and doing things right is the life skills that we're talking about, that Angie's frustrated about. They overlook, and in her book, the shortening of the bench is probably the biggest thing. And I don't know what degree that occurred, Angie, where the best players just got way more ice time and nobody said anything. But that's not building confidence, building self-esteem. That's at that age with young players, it's trying to win the game, because some kids happen to be, maybe have a better birth date, be more mature, or invested private money at the young age. And now they're getting all the ice time and other kids are being left out. And the whole negative experience, as happened in your boy's case, they quit the sport. It wasn't fun. They didn't get to play, and they didn't gain anything from the experience that they enjoyed. So, any comments there, Angie?
Yeah, so I realize that some of the comments in my book are naive, and people who know more about hockey than I will do, which is almost everybody, will find them naive. But so one of the things is I argue against tiering, and I wasn't. Obviously, you need tiering. Obviously, you can't have kids from all different levels on the ice, or it won't work. But I was thinking more of my specific community. So we're a very small town. I live in Fernie. We have 5,000 or 6,000 people. So there's enough at those young ages for 2 teams. And so the parents whose kids are good, like good 8-year-olds, they really want to make a good team and a not so good team. And then we end up in leagues where our kids are traveling to, Golden for a league game. Golden is a 3.5-hour drive in December, January, February. We're traveling to Whitefish for a league game. Like, we're traveling across an international border to do a league game. So I always said the kids aren't that different. Like, even when they did tryouts, I think they said they rated the kids 1 to 10, and out of all the kids, they were 6 to an 8 or a 6 to a 9 or something, right? So there's not a huge difference between the kids. I said, why don't we divide them into 2 equal teams? Then we can at least have some home games. We can have kids not traveling so much. We can not spend so much time on dangerous winter roads. We can save people money. It's just a lot of reasons why that makes more sense for families. But those parents so invested in their kids being the good kids, they just had to have a good team and a bad team. Like, they just had to have it. So I realize when I say no tiering, I'm talking about a very specific community with a specific group of kids. But it's that same mentality, Wally, you're talking about. The good kids play more. The good kids are on the good team. They're 8, right? We don't have any idea who. I love this story recently on this thread where someone talked. I know the name. You're going to correct me. You're going to be able to fill it in because I'm having a blank.
Mike Kennedy.
Mike Kennedy talked about being drafted from the UBC onto the NHL, and nobody would have predicted that when he was in grade 12, right? You don't know who's going to be good, and sometimes the little kids, the small kids, are very dexterous and they are really good. And when they're young, or they're good, learn skating faster, and they look amazing with the other kids who are just learning to skate. But when they're 12, you can't even pick them out of the pile. So we don't know who's going to be good, and that doesn't need to be the emphasis at age 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So that's all. Now I'm ranting. I get a bit ranty on that topic. And I remind myself of that because as a coach, now I can get really excited when someone starts showing a little promise or suddenly has a leap in ability. And I have to, remember, okay, I can be excited that this child's improving, but there's no reason that that child who I haven't seen a leap for in a year might have their leap next month. They get strong at different times. They catch on to the feel of the water at the different times. They are really awkward in their bodies at different times. So you just keep an eye on all of them and how can I help them all improve? And it's different. Like sometimes I'll notice, oh my goodness, this child has the fastest kick I've ever seen, but they're not using it in their stroke and no other coach has even noticed the kick. But if I can get them to use that kick in their stroke, they're going to have a big burst. But if I'm not looking at that child because they're at the back of the lane and my attention's all at the person on the front of the lane, I might never see that. And that child might go their whole life without knowing that they have a superhuman kick that they can also use when they're swimming if they figure out how. So you have to keep your eyes open as a coach, open on everybody, and get rid of this kid is good and this kid isn't good. I try really to never use the word talent at that age because each child has talents and our job is to find what they are.
Kim, I'm curious, when we talk about tiering and in your association, at what age does tiering start? At what level does it start? And when you start to tier, is that where there's a house division, which is regarded as less competitive, and a division that's travel and more competitive and more consuming? How do you deal with that? Your speaker, Kimmy.
Great, Jesus. It's been interesting this year, just because we missed tryouts. So typically our tryouts would be in the spring for rep teams. And so what that means is typically rep starts U9 here in Toronto. So that's novice. And we would typically only have one U9 rep team. So that would be a team that would travel to other communities in the GTA and play. And then at the U11 level, we would typically offer 4 rep teams. Again, traveling, playing in tournaments. And then we would have the next tier down would be called competitive development. So those would be with families and players who maybe don't want to commit fully to the craziness that is competitive hockey in Toronto and the amount of travel and time that it takes. But they want to have a little more practice, a little more development. And then we have house league. So our house league at all levels is typically 1 or 2. It's at least twice a week on the ice, sometimes 3. So it could be a second practice or a second game, but that's house. And then competitive development's a little bit more than that. And then competitive is a little bit more than that. Interestingly, this year, because we missed tryouts last spring, we had to do something different for U9 and U11. So we made 4 balanced teams at U11. So kind of what Angie was alluding to. Now, who knows if this will be something we can do in the future, but it was an interesting experiment because in Toronto, everyone can, there's no, in girls hockey, there's no cards. You're not relegated to any particular city. So I could go play in Barrie if I felt like it, even though I live in Toronto. So you're sort of fighting against other associations who might be offering something different than you and give, families a soft place to land. But anyways, we decided to do 4 even teams at the U11 level. And so I went in and evaluated all the players. Wally gave me a lot of insights on how to go about doing that. And I tiered all the players. So we scored them out of 15 and we went, there was a kid who scored 15, if you can believe it. He could easily play Pee Wee AA, and kids who went all the way down to 5 and everything in between. And we ranked 100 players at the U11 level. We have 150 players at the U11 level at Leaside. And the way we ended up doing it is we named coaches for 4 teams, and they didn't want, well, first of all, their daughters had to be on one of the 4 teams, right? So you had to pick 4 coaches whose daughters were clearly in the top 60 so that it could justify them being the coach of their team because their daughter was on the team. So that was step 1. And then what we landed upon was we got to pick the first 5 players for each team. So the association said, these are the, we basically split up the top 15. And we said, you get 5, you get 5, you get 5. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, the top 20. And then they could trade amongst their top 5. So, I live next door to that girl, so I'll trade her for her. And they did the trade on their own. And then so we named the top 5 for them, and then they got to come to another evaluation and sort of pick the rest. And it was done collaboratively. So they did it all on Zoom, and they said, oh, I want this one, you take this one. And they actually did a pretty good job. They were very even. Now, we never got to play games, so there's no proof of concept. They never got to play games against each other. They never got to play games like in any way, but I did go on and do skill development with all the teams, and I would say they were very even. And a lot of it is perception, right? There were kids who were a little bit stronger, but they were not light years stronger than everybody else. So the parents might have perceived, oh, this girl can play double A or she can play A. In reality, as someone who's been around coaching a long time, as you alluded to, Angie, there were a couple kids who were just, phenomenal athletes who skill-wise weren't there, but after 6 practices, they were there, right? And so, we're still not sure what we're going to do going into next season. We've named our double A team, and our U11 double A team was named prior to this process last year, and they've been named prior to this process this year, because if we don't name him now, they'll all go to a different association 10 minutes down the road. So there's a bit of an urgency from an association perspective, but for the second tier down, and I hesitate to use that word, we still haven't figured out exactly what we're going to do, but we want to use an evaluation process. We want to name those coaches, give the coaches some, ability to pick a few players. But what it'll, prevents, of course, is, picking the friends and family deal where you just pick a kid who's a 3 out of 15 because you golf with, their parent. But it also meant that a few kids who fell through the cracks last year didn't fall through the cracks this time. And that's the part I care the most about. If we have a kid who's 11 out of 15 and no one takes them on a rep team, why are they not on a rep team? And so I wouldn't necessarily say to a coach, you have to take this player, but I need to know why you didn't take this player. Why did you take this kid who's 6 out of 15 and not the kid who's 11 out of 15? So it gives us a little bit of, ability to track players long term, which is something that's a huge endeavor to do. But it also allows us to say to the coach and hold them a bit accountable to why they actually picked that kid. And shockingly, in this whole process, the kid who scored 15 out of 15 didn't make the double A team. We couldn't understand why she didn't make the double A team in advance of this whole process. She was like, it was like watching an elite Pee Wee double A player on the ice with Adam. So I went to the Adam double A coach. I said, why didn't you take this kid? Oh, we had her in novice and she was a bit of a problem and the dad was high maintenance. I was like, wait, so we're talking about an 8-year-old? Like, you had a problem with her as an 8-year-old. Skill-wise, she's better than everyone else. And she was respectful. She was a great teammate. She was passing to everyone else. She'd slow down so the other kids could get the puck and pass to them. But at 8, they had already decided, oh, well, the dad's a bit of an issue and the kid doesn't listen well. And I thought, my kids are younger, but I'm like, well, my kids don't listen well most of the time. I hope that doesn't mean they'll never make a team. But that was really interesting. So by far the highest ranked player, the highest ranked team didn't want because she was a quote unquote challenge. And to me, that's extremely alarming, right? So I think there's challenges at both ends, but we haven't solved anything because there's no proof of concept. But, I do think we have the ability at the U9 and U11 level to do things a little differently. I think in the Toronto area, once you get to U13, people are just going to chase letters and go wherever they want because, within 20 minutes of us, there's 4 different hockey associations, all offering teams at the same level. So people can choose association, they can choose coaches. There's a laundry list of opportunities here in Toronto. So.
Jordan, you've got your hand up?
Yes, Wally, I had a couple of comments and then a question, I guess. That's a philosophical one that I don't know that any of us will be able to answer. But just wanted to thank Bob for some great reminders there when you're talking about connecting with players and the role that a coach and the coaching staff can do. And focusing on what's important. And I had the opportunity to listen to a guy by the name of Sebastian Sassville, who summited Everest as only the first Canadian type 1 diabetic to summit Everest, and only 3rd type 1 diabetic in the world to do it. And he's also an endurance racer. He ran all the way across Canada running the 40K a day, but he's done the death race or whatever the heck that thing's called, and some of those. But he was talking about Everest and said that those who don't come back from Everest are the ones that lose focus on the why and the purpose of what they're doing, and they get too focused on the summit. And they don't realize. It goes, many of us don't realize when we start into the whole thing that there is no straight line to the summit of Everest. And like he asked the people on the call, what happens when you acclimatize yourself at base camp, go up to camp 1? He said, well, what's the next logical step that many of us would think? Well, go to camp 2. And he said, no, you go back to base camp. Then you go to camp 2, back to base camp. Camp 3, back to base camp. Doing that acclimatization the entire time. He said, he said, the frustrating part is it's an entire week to get to camp 3, knowing you're going to turn around and go back down to base camp. So he said, all of those challenges that you faced all the way up, you got to face them down and that. And he talked about the complacency piece creeping in, and he goes, that's where it really gets dangerous, and relying on the team. But so that whole idea of focusing on the process, and I know I've shared it before, but I had a art teacher that was a colleague of Bobbi Jo's over at the high school, that he's a glass blower, was part of the specialty that he took at art college. And he said you could spend, hours and hours and hours working on the same piece of glass on the end of a blowpipe in that oven. And he goes, only to pull it out and have it slip off and shatter into 1,000 pieces on the floor. And he goes, if you don't enjoy the process, you'll never pick that blowpipe back up again and try again. And I think that's the piece with the sport and that focusing on the process. But Angie, you brought up the tiering piece, and I know Kim, you explained it so well of what we see in the sport of tiering and that piece. And we're working on our next year's schedule right now for a school, an elementary school, and we have students who are registered or have been registered in kindergarten this year but have never attended. Yet they're going to be of the age to be in grade 1 next year, and will, because kindergarten isn't a requirement, you can enter in grade 1 immediately as an entry point, as long as you're the right age. So we're looking at having these students starting grade 1, and we were talking about that these students will be scattered amongst students who've never been in a school, will be scattered amongst our grade 1 classes, of which we'll have probably 3. And so I started thinking about the tiering piece and thinking of parents are accepting of children of all different abilities being in a classroom.
Yeah.
Why are they not accepting of children of all different abilities being on a team? And I do know that, yes, there are some parents that do want what they would call an exceptional experience, going to paying big dollars to be in a private school or that sort of thing. But I know that we will see students going all the way through, and where Bobbi Jo's working and where I spent 10 years, we had students that went on to be doctors and lawyers and nurses and teachers and truck drivers. We prepared them for the world of work just the same as some of those other settings. So that whole tiering concept, it was one of those things, because we're thinking about it right now with those kids coming in at the grade 1 level, that we won't be placing all of those students in the same class.
I wanted to talk for a second about your point about the why, because I interviewed Karina LeBlanc this week for that Active for Life series I mentioned. And so she was on the soccer team, the Canadian national soccer team, and they went in 2008 to win an Olympic medal, and they didn't. And then they went back in 2012 and won Canada's first ever medal in soccer. And she said the difference was, I think the coach was Jim Herdman, and she said he came on 11 months before they went to the Olympics and said, what's your why? Why are you doing this? And they, as a team, did a mission statement kind of exercise where they came up with their why, and their why was to inspire the next generation. And she has quite a long story of how that focus, like we're here to inspire the next generation, actually resulted in their bronze medal at that game. So I think that's so important to know a why that has nothing to do with the placing, right? And as far as the cheering, it's interesting. Like I say, I'm not a hockey expert, but with swimming, because I live in a small town and we don't have a big club because we're a small town, so we have kids of all different levels in a lane at a time. And sometimes it takes some figuring out, how am I going to do this when this child can do this set and this swimmer can't? And especially now with COVID, we can only have 3 kids at each end leaving from each end, and it's double lanes and they're different abilities, but you can do it. I mean, there's ways. There's always creative ways to manage. And vastly different abilities. It's just the way it is, different age, different. And we have a meet, like, because we can't have real meet, so we have a virtual meet, so the kids are entering their times. We have one 18-year-old boy who's fast, and he might be racing against a 13-year-old girl. Like, we just don't have that head-to-head competition in the kind of club. So the kids have to learn how to race on their own and do their own race, which is one of the lessons that they have to learn eventually anyways. So for every con, there's a pro too.
Can you not handicap them so they can race against each other?
Yeah, that's one thing we do too. Yeah. But I just mean, so yeah, we do all kinds of things like that. But I just mean in terms of having that spark of seeing, like, we do have some kids who are racers, and if there's someone next to them who's going to beat them, they're going to go faster than they would on their own. And so they really miss that competition. And we're entering the times virtually, and then they're getting ranked provincially and all of that. But some kids just miss the real head-to-head competition, and so that's just the reality of a small club with wildly different abilities, and we find ways to deal with it.
How did the parents, did they miss the competition?
Terribly. And I think they miss, not for bad reasons. I think a lot of parents, that becomes their whole social life, traveling around with the kids, and it's really fun. It's a fun way to spend time with your children. It's really expensive. I think we've all realized how much money we're saving this year, but yeah, they miss that, becomes their whole social life as parents, and it's evaporated. They miss it terribly, as bad as the kids. And I don't even mean that in a negative, vicarious living kind of way. I just mean they've committed to driving their kids around, and this has become their life, and it's not there anymore.
Yes, when you talk about that, Angie, I know that the way things have changed, and we've talked about this different times, and that parents have basically replaced many of their own personal pursuits with their children's. And if you go back as I would like to say, as not that long ago as when I was a player in minor hockey, where you had carpooling and things like that doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah, and carpooling and buses, and when I swam, we always got billeted, so you just stayed at a stranger's house, which you can see why we don't do that anymore. But the money that families spend now on hotel rooms, and like the whole family going to restaurants all weekend, it's out of hand, out of control. But yeah, you can see why people don't let their kids.
But you're
go
also right, Angie, that it becomes a social network of your friends. You know, like.
Yep.
I'm just entering into the foray with our kids just being new into sport, and that really is a fun part of it. You know, meeting new people from different backgrounds as adults, you don't get to do in very many situations. So, you know, creating new friendships is something that is really fun. It's a really great part of it. And going back to what I put in the chat when we were chatting about something different, but, you know, the stresses that are on parents and situations to get their kids on time. I think back in the day when I played, and, you know, if you're late, that you didn't get to play the first period, like things like that I never thought about how hard that probably was on my parents. And so as coaches, being cognizant of the family dynamic, and you really talk really well in the book about just how it pulls you apart from your partner too, when you have different goals or aspirations from the partner, and how hard that is. Like, so as coaches, being really understanding and having that conversation with the parents too, like, what is easy for you? What is hard for you? Like, how can we make this a better situation for you and your kids, or multiple kids, or things like that. So I really appreciate that you you alluded to that, and I can already see it at 5 years of age with my husband. You have different choices that you would make. So coming to an agreement always means somebody is not getting what they want, right? And so it's certainly hard. And I can imagine with multiple kids trying to get them to all different rinks, and you're just never seeing your partner. And yeah, anyways.
Yeah, and I mean, just middle class families are working their heads off to pay for it all. So both parents are working full time, probably have tons of job stress, and then driving different kids to different towns for different competitions and for practices. And there's a few years when the kids at kind of middle age that we felt stretched so thin. And the last thing we had time for was our marriage. So that suffered. And then it's a stressful, fighty environment on top of it all. So it was not really a good years around here. And not
so
that
maybe you have something for the coaches to, you have that intake interviews with the kids, and you have all these forms. But is there something something the coaches or organizations can provide for assistance for families mentally?
Well, I think more carpooling, even helping people arrange more carpooling and stuff. Because, right now, or the way it was before COVID, all the families would drive to the rink and all the families would drive home. And now that the kids are older, they kind of organize their own, like, oh, I'll get a ride with Giles, or I'll get a ride with so-and-so. And then, we only end up driving every couple of weeks instead. And now, and I don't know, and I don't think that needs to be on the team, but I guess, and it's not like I was blaming, I mean, part of the book is this bad thread of my marriage, because it's a personal memoir too. And it's not like I'm blaming hockey for my marriage, obviously, but just I'm sort of saying it's part of the reason I felt like it was part of the book is because it's part of how, as middle class sporty families, we throw ourselves so fully into our organized sports with our kids, and we just follow this excessive kind of model that everybody's following instead of being, well, what is going to make our family happiest? What is going to keep our kids healthiest? What is going to put those questions first instead of the mad race to keep up with everybody? And I think that I'm not saying that's on the job of the coaches but on the job of the family. So I'm hoping, I guess with my book, I'm making the point that each family needs to be vigilant. What are we trying to get out of sport? What are we trying to get out of family life? These years go so fast. Before you know it, your kids are grown up and asking if they can take the car, and it's shocking. They're taller than you are. It's shocking. So enjoy those years, but are we enjoying them by running around like chickens with our head cut off to make all the different practices and all the different competitions and all the different... I don't think so. So I think there's just keeping vigilant about asking yourself, are we doing what's best for a happy family life right now?
I think too, what I got out of it was just the really communication aspect of it, and celebrating the small wins, celebrating that with somebody rather than it being a competition with, when one parent is with one kid and the other one's with the other kid, and you're not doing this or you are doing this, and but really celebrating the wins and sharing what your kid is doing, because that's ultimately where the joy is, right? Is watching your kid have fun doing something.
And we really did a divide and conquer approach, which was because my husband just was like, no way, I'm not doing this. I live in Fernie to ski. I'm not driving all the way to Golden to sit in a hockey rink all weekend. He's flat out no. And I was from but I love sports. And if my son loves this sport, then I'm going to do that for him because my parents did it for me. So I totally did it. And my husband stayed home and went skiing with our daughter. So because of that divide and conquer, I wouldn't recommend that. I mean, I got very distant from my daughter because I wasn't home. I was in hockey rinks. And so that took some rectifying. Once I realized that, I was like, oh my gosh, we need some mother-daughter time here pronto. So we didn't handle it the best way in those years. It's easy to say that retrospectively, but.
Well, I think, Angie, the divide and conquer is very prevalent from what I've seen in minor hockey. If they've got multiple kids, it's, the mom's always taking the daughter somewhere, the dad's always taking somewhere. But I as you guys are having this conversation, and I definitely remember this part of the book because, often I'm coaching, but I'm not coaching my own kids yet. And, it struck me about, obviously the division of responsibilities between my husband and I, because I'm off coaching someone else's kids. And he's with our kids. And so there's that, mom guilt, whatever you want to call it, that side of it. But I was watching, I don't watch a lot of cheesy TV, but I was watching Last Chance U, which if you're not familiar with it is basically profiles coaches and teams it's on Netflix, of kind of these kids who are on their last chance to really get a scholarship. So it's all junior colleges. And so it kind of delves into the life of the players, who are all 18, 19, 20. I'm not sure how they all are, but they're all adults, and the coaches. And this current coach, which is at a basketball school, I think in LA, very passionate coach, like reminds me of myself, like jumping in the drills, banging on the floor, like really into it. And, the team is lackluster, not performing, and he gets extremely emotional. And, the players look like they don't want to be there. And he starts saying, like, I missed my son's basketball game to be here. I missed my daughter's, dance to be here and coach you guys. And that really hit home for me, in addition to what you were saying about the divide and conquer, is I think there has to be a little bit of an understanding. A lot of the coaches who are coaching in minor hockey are volunteers and parents of coaches or players on the team. There's a very small subset of us who are paid coaches who are coaching someone else's kids, and our kids are off doing something else. So, I appreciated the insight from that in those stories in your book. And then I was, as the way the universe works, immediately met by this episode in The Last Chance U of this coach, like basically crying in front of all these 20-year-old guys, talking about, what he was giving up to be there as well. So I just think it's an important sentiment to keep out there, because I think it's something that just gets swept under the rug for wins and losses and practices and all those types of things. So I appreciate that in the book. It was very insightful.
Thank you. I hope you get a chance to coach your own kids, Kim. It's so fun. I didn't count on that either, how fun it is to coach my own kids. And I've told them right away, like, they don't have to call me mom. If they don't want to, they can call me Coach Angie like everyone else, and that I will treat them the same as everyone else. But it's a really fun way to connect with them, just at that. Like, now my daughter is 12 and my son is 14 now. So they're kind of at that age where they would be pulling away a bit. But suddenly I get to spend all this time with them and see them really improve at a sport they're enjoying. And it's pretty rewarding.
I've got a question about coaching your own kid in hockey. Parent coaches, when you get to competitive levels, Kim, at your competitive levels, most competitive levels, do you have parents coaching their kids?
At most of our competitive teams, we do. There are only 6 teams that have non-parent coaches. So out of our competitive teams, we have 28 competitive teams. Sounds ridiculous when I say it. 28 competitive teams. Only 6 have non-parent coaches. 6 paid non-parent coaches. The rest are all parents of players on the team. And then in house league, all of them are parents of players on the team as well.
Want to go?
Yeah, that's another topic with kids growing up. The time away from your kids and the time with your kids, if you can coach them. And most minor hockey associations I know here in Calgary at the AA, triple level, they wouldn't consider having parent coaches. And there are some parent coaches who are ethically and technically more qualified than existing coaches, and they do not bring them in to coach because of perception of playing their kids as favorites. And Allison Tufts, in her book Behind the Glass, she writes about her husband coaching her son, comments a little bit, and you have to sort of listen between the lines of what she says, but I'm pretty sure he was harder on his son than he was on other kids, which I think is one of the problems of quality parent coaches, that they go out of their way to not, to treat their own child the same as they might treat other kids. So just wanted to bring that point up because
I think too, Wally, it creates a gender bias as well within coaching. I think that means for the most part, then the man can go coach and then the woman is expected to be at home. So it precludes a lot of elite female players from going into coaching at those levels, which is unfortunate. So I love what Kim's organization has done and has allowed that. And that allows both men and women to be able to have the choice, at least, or whoever is choosing to stay at home or not choosing to stay at home. It isn't, based on that.
There's another question with that one, Sammy. I had this conversation with Sam Holmes, who is the coach development person with Girls Hockey Calgary. And we were talking about the gender bias where there are dads that are out on the ice coaching their sons' teams on the male side that can't skate or have no background in the game. But when we would never see moms step up the ice on the female side or the male side, because there are those dads that never had any experience in the game that will step on at the initiation level on the female side as well. But we don't see that with moms. So it was an interesting observation.
Yeah, and I think that happens across sports. It's a societal construct as well. I know when my brother and I started swimming, my dad took his levels in swimming. He never swam, and so he started coaching the club. And my mom sold the suits and bathing caps for the club. That was just what was kind of the expectation. So, I think we will start to change that as society changes too. That's part of that is not necessarily just a sport issue. But the more encouragement that you can give, I think, within organizations to give that opportunity so that the female or maybe the person that's not as comfortable feels more comfortable out there and feels like they have a support network to lean on, might change that as well. And then these young girls that are growing up with female coaches, when they are older, that just is a normal thing for them. So they think, I played the game. Okay, I'm going to give back to the game and I'm going to coach. So I think we're starting to enter that generation now. You see a lot of the PW girls finish and then they go into coaching their local minor hockey teams, which is great.
That's a big theme, Sami Jo, of the article I have coming out next with Active for Life, or maybe next with Karina LeBlanc. She said, "See it to believe it" is her motto. So she works for CONCACAF as leading football around the world, and it's get women into coaching roles, get home games in these countries that have never had home games, so girls can see girls competing. And just the more you see these things happening, women in these places, the more it's obviously I can do that.
It's normalized, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think at our organization, a lot of our non-parent paid coaches are female, and not exclusively, but out of the 6, there's 4 of them are female. But there is at the highest level, so I coach in the Provincial Women's Hockey League, there's only 4 female head coaches out of 20. And, I've told lots of stories here of sort of people asking me where my kids are when I'm coaching. I'm supposed to bring my kids to work every day, and sometimes I do, but
does anybody ever say that to a male coach?
No,
where are your kids?
I ask them back. I said, where are your kids?
Yeah.
Why aren't your kids here? Who's watching your kids? So it's an interesting challenge, but we do have actually quite a few women. We have a very big senior learn to play program here at Leaside of women. Their daughters start to play and then they decide they want to play. And we're starting to pull women out of that program, that learn to play program, and transition them into coaching. And so we do actually have them at the house league level and at the rep level. And now our rep level coaches, it's becoming increasingly more female as we take the women out of senior learn to play, they go into house league to coach, and then up into competitive. So I think 5 of our competitive coaches, current competitive coaches, were women who started to learn how to play hockey, who are now coaching their daughters at the A or double B level, which I think is, I can't take any credit for that because I'm new in this role, but it is still a huge issue, right, of being a female coach, full stop, and then being a female coach with kids. And there's not many of us, so I'm a bit of a unicorn in that regard because I'm not coaching my own kids. But I have heard many stories from, Lisa Haley that, Wally alluded to, of her coaching her boys team at Leaside, her son on the boys AA team, and people kind of questioning her abilities, given that she had just won an Olympic gold medal as a coach. But I went on with my daughter's learn to play program at Leaside, and you know, they didn't have enough instructors. I said, my daughter's here anyways. I want to watch. Like, I'll just come on. And the 22-year-old running it was like, oh my God, that's so great. Do you want to run the whole thing? I said, no, just tell me what, want me to do a shooting drill, whatever. So I go out there. And then, of course, all the parents who saw me in the stands the week before, like, why does she get to go out there? Like, they had no idea. Not that they should have known that I played at a high level or that I coached the highest level team in the organization. But, I'd hear parents, moms and dads, being like, so do you have your coaching qualifications? Do you have these things? Like, and I did think to myself, if this was a dad out here volunteering, would they have asked the same questions? Now, they let me volunteer because I was a coach. They wouldn't just let any parent volunteer in this particular program. So I did, sort of have an inside track there. But it was fascinating out there with 4-year-olds, people being like, oh, you're pretty good. Like, are you qualified to do that? Like, and I don't skate that well. I don't know that I ever did, but I don't think I'm so bad that you couldn't tell I'm, once played at a high level. But that, I would say we're pretty progressive in terms of the amount of females we have involved on the coaching ranks. And even then, there's a lot of mindsets that need to be changed about, the women's ability to coach or be invested in the coaching process. So hopefully.
Tim, would you say that your organization is maybe the most progressive? Like, I don't see that many in all the others, but
I can't speak to like at the younger age groups at other organizations, what they're doing or what they have in the coaching ranks. I think actually Central York, which is just north of us, is doing a pretty good job of getting more females involved. But I've also got a lot of my ex-players involved now. So they've gone on and played for me. They played college hockey, and now 3 of them have come back, been assistant coaches, and are now head coaches in our organization. So I hope to have a wave of former players come back through who decide to coach. But of course, the challenge will then be, as Sammy, I know you've seen, and this is what makes me a unicorn, is as soon as those women have kids, if they choose to, will they stay in the coaching ranks or will they get out of the coaching ranks? And there used to be other women coaching at my level who have left because they had kids. And I'm not judging right or wrong, but they were great coaches who left because they had children, and it might be 5-10 years before they come back into the coaching ranks.
Yeah, and even at the national team, you'll see women promoted very quickly that don't have kids. But the ones that have kids are not promoted very quickly. And some of it's self-choosing, some of it's not self-choosing, right? That seems to be the case. So,
well, I think the point is valid because, the way I coached and the way I approached things changed completely once I had kids. So there is actually a tremendous value to that. I'm not saying like we should hire people because they have kids, but, I became a much better, more inclusive, more, as my players would say, a nicer coach once I had kids. So it's interesting that, at the national team level, they, whether they're consciously prioritizing that or not, you would think you would want people who have a bit more of that, that feeling towards the players and that way of communicating, as opposed to thinking of them as commodities that are going to help you win a hockey game. I'm sure it's different at the Olympic level. It might not be as warm and fuzzy, but now that I've been through it, I see the value. Like I look at the parent coaches very differently now. And I think, oh man, you had all this information for all these years. I didn't have kids. I never tapped into them as resources to get those insights. I came from it just from, well, I know all the hockey stuff. And I'm not a teacher, but I know the hockey stuff. And I think I really missed out by not tapping into the knowledge that they had. And now I'm lucky I get to do both, which I think makes me pretty unique in my role. But I really, I wish I had that aha moment a lot earlier. And now with our younger female coaches, we make sure to pair them up with a coach who is a parent who's been coaching for a long time. So we make sure they have someone on their staff or someone, in the team who has been a coach at Leaside for a while, who can kind of give them some of that insight from the parenting side of it. I think it's extremely valuable. I gave up a while ago trying to get into the Hockey Canada way of thinking, but I would think that would be a really cool priority to have, the women who've had kids or even guys who have kids. I think that gives you a different perspective.
Kim, I talked to Lisa Haley about this, and Sammy, you brought up the national team and women coaching. I talked to Lisa Haley yesterday about looking at the selection of the male, the national women's team at this time, and 3 guys and 1 girl. And quite frankly, I know that there's female coaches that have Olympic experience, educated as in the game of hockey, definitely versed in the game of hockey, technical knowledge with coaching ability that could coach that team. And I think they're more capable of handling it technically. Anybody with that kind of experience in the national women's program, females, and they have the emotional intelligence of coaching that I think men are still learning that women bring to sports. So I had the conversation with Lisa yesterday about pick 3 people that have played on an Olympic team or been in the Olympic program that you would want to coach the team, and then ask them the question of if you're the head coach, who would you want as your assistant? And if you're an assistant, who would you work for? And that communication, and that's the only issue of a group working together. And I just believe a female staff could be selected that would make much more progress than the program that's presently appears to be really spinning its wheels. So that's just my opinion. But thanks for alluding to that, Kim. And I know before we've talked about, and Kim shared the story of coaching and breastfeeding her child with coaching the girls in the dressing room. And that's a reality of, coaching today if you're a female. And if you're on the national staff and having a child, how do you manage that? And there is a perception that, well, gee, it's impossible, but I know it is possible. It's just a matter
And
of,
like Angie said, if you have seen it, you believe it. So
Yeah.
anybody that's ever played for Kim now knows that that's a possibility.
Yeah.
And, she's changing mindsets for females as well, like not just for the men around her. But I think that that's important. And I think it's important for male coaches too, to include, their household in any way that they can, to show them as more human too at times, and I think that's an important aspect as well. It's not just something that the women need to be doing. I think it's what the men coaching also need to be doing as well, to see them as people. Like as athletes, we need to see our coaches as people.
Wally, I know you know this, but I think the addition of Vicky Sanahar as a coach at that level is a fantastic decision. I know we all know Vicky well, and but I played with Vicky, or I attempted to play with Vicky. I think I skated up and down the wing while Vicky did all the work. But I've interacted with her a lot as a junior coach, and she's got a lot of my former players at her team at U of T. But I've always been struck, once I got to know her as a coach, how different her approach was than the quote unquote traditional high performance hockey coach. And she's got 2 kids, both of whom play hockey. So I really think she'll add a very interesting perspective to that. We've also, at Leaside, we were fortunate to have Angela James helped out with our midget AA team a little bit, and she's got kids as well. And
the tough thing with Vicky is she can coach at the World Championship, but she can't centralize.
Yeah.
Because of her, or is choosing not to. I shouldn't say can't. Is choosing not to, right? So you also.
But is there a way? Is there? Yeah. Would there be a way to make that more attractive to someone with kids? Right. And I think you talked about that on an earlier call, right? If you had someone like Vicky, I would think Hockey Canada would bend over backwards.
Should bend over backwards.
They should. I mean, I have no idea of the process. Obviously, Wally would have a better idea of how coaches are selected and enticed into the program. But I mean, Lisa did it. Lisa took the year and was centralized away from her son. yeah, it's a choice, obviously, but I think if you could incentivize, I would think there's enough value in having someone like Vicky Sunahar involved, right? A future Hall of Famer coaching at that level, that, you know, they would find ways to make it work for her. And I think that's the reality now. I mean, people like people, I think, I've never worked in a traditional, you know, workplace, but, you know, people do make more accommodations now for parents. I would hope that Hockey Canada would be progressive in that way too. But more people like that coaching at that level, I think, would be phenomenal. And I also think, this is my soapbox moment, I do think, and I'm on the outside looking in, but there's a lot of players, former players who are promoted who have not a lot of coaching experience, who are maybe accelerated through into the coaching ranks. And that is what it is. That's called a meritocracy, I understand. But, you know, for those of us who've been coaching for 15 years, it can be a little frustrating to see someone who just stopped playing all of a sudden become an Olympic assistant coach. But that is what it is.
Well, and it's a meritocracy based on the wrong thing, like comparing apples to oranges, because someone who's a good player isn't necessarily a good coach. There's no correlation to that. So it's not even a meritocracy, I wouldn't say, because they're not getting it on their coaching merit. They're getting it on their athlete merit, which might not translate at all.
Yeah, and I'd say that Hockey Canada has been this way, what would you say, Kim, like probably 10 years-ish, where the promotion from within, because that wasn't the case when you and I played within Hockey Canada. It was promoting coaches versus now promoting players. It seems to be a different mentality. And I get part of it is getting these girls into coaching. But to me, it's you should be getting girls into coaching like Cheryl Pounder, Becky Keller. They're coaching their kids' teams. They're coaching their local organization teams. If they get through that system and they have 10 years of coaching and they've done a great job, yes, promote them like Vicky. For sure. I get exactly what you're saying. But I think what's happening now is, you're so right. You know, I had Courtney Burchard. I hired her to be our head coach as a 28-year-old, which was very uncommon. But I surrounded her with incredible mentors like Ken Dufton, people that had been around for a long time, had 2 assistant coaches, male assistant coaches who were much older, who had much more experience to really help guide her. And so I think in a, not to call women's professional hockey minor hockey, but in that situation, I think it was really great because it allows her to develop. In my mind, she develops for 5 or 10 years in that situation, and then she makes the leap.
No, I've seen a lot of women like myself who, you know, I never made the national team. But I was at that level, arguably, right? And I have been flat out told by people at Hockey Canada that we take people who played in our program. Like, I don't know if that's changed now in the last couple of years, but I was flat out told that was not an option for me. And whether that was the truth or not, like, who knows? But I know a lot of really great female coaches, young coaches, 28, 30, 35, who are phenomenal, who are getting out of coaching because coaching the Olympic team is like going to the Olympics for them. They weren't going to make it as a player. They would love to coach the Olympics, but they are, as you alluded to earlier, see it, be it. All they're seeing is elite former Olympians getting moved up. And like I said, I know most of these women, and I think they're all great, but they don't have coaching experience at, you know, of actually running a team and having, you know, like,
yeah, agreed.
This is a bad analogy, but like the gun is pointing at you. It's different when you're a head coach and like you have to make all the decisions. And if you screw up, it all falls on you versus, you know, running a hockey school or being an assistant. And I've done both of those things. So I can honestly say it's a difference. But once you've dealt with those challenges of being a head coach, right, then you should be able to understand a potential role at that level. But I've seen far too many women who aspired to that. They knew they weren't going to make the Olympic team as a player, but would have loved to have been involved as a coach. And all they see is former players getting promoted very quickly and go, well, like, why would I even bother?
Yeah, Kim, if you and I threw our hat in the ring, they would probably pick me. And that shouldn't be the case.
For sure.
Because I am terrible.
I was going to say that tongue-in-cheek, that this is just the female game catching up to the male side, because I'm sure
exactly right.
Bob can tell you plenty of stories about coach selection through the major junior ranks right up through pro ranks and those things. But just to add to your discussion with it to do with female coaches, I often said when I was coaching with Bobbi Jo that the female game needed more Bobbi Jo and less middle-aged man. I mean that those elite females need to see themselves in the coaching staff. Not saying that there isn't a role for people who have experience like I have had through the game and that. And when you talk about coaching at the Olympic level, Kim, I said to Wally that it's harder for a female in Canada to make the Olympic team than a male to make an NHL team, just because there is only one program. But I'd like to hear Bob's thoughts on where he's seen that so-called meritocracy in his coaching experience.
Well, I agree with Kim 100%. It's no different in the men's game. I honestly and truly believe that you learn to be a coach the same way as you learn to be a player. And unfortunately, in the male game, if you're a player and you want to coach, you can't coach. They'll just hire you. It's plain and simple. They think because you did play at a high level that you'll be able to coach at a high level. And there's hundreds of examples out there where that is blown up in their faces. And I don't think it's going to be any different in the female game. And I think if you want to be a coach after you play, then go back and be certified, go through the steps, start at a lower level, learn how to deal with the players, because a player dealing with a player is totally different than a player dealing with a coach or a coach dealing with a player. I think you need to take those steps. You need to learn. I think there's a lot of players that could become great coaches if they take the time and do it the right way. I'll give you one example. Ken Hitchcock is a guy that didn't play, and he was a great coach, right? And he got a very lucky break, and he'll be the first guy to admit it. But there's all kinds of guys that never got a break because they didn't have a contact at the NHL level or hadn't played. And I think you're seeing that now with your women's program, and it's wrong, and it's got to change.
Angie, when you were telling me when you were coaching, you said you've been coaching, and I asked you the question: you're coaching hockey, and you said no, swimming. But that disappointed me because I thought maybe you could coach hockey because you could coach hockey. I don't even if you can even skate, but that's my point is playing is not as important. I think your knowledge of the game and the X's and O's, you can hire people to support you. I really believe that how you manage your personnel and get the most out of them, transmitting belief. I really believe that that's an art of coaching that doesn't require knowledge and X's and O's. It's just dealing with people and getting the most of them. And when you do have a staff and surround yourself with a chemistry of people, a group of staff that will work together, challenge one another, not be bobbleheads, but really speak out and trust and respect one another and accept the head coach's decision making in the end, but working together. And I really feel in 2002 that existed on our staff. I regarded myself as the X and O guy with all that knowledge, but Danielle certainly had the emotional intelligence of the big picture of what the team needed to do. And Mel, very organized, very knowledgeable, capable of doing any role, coaching that team. And we worked well enough together, but it was pretty dysfunctional at times. But I think we worked together and got results in the end. And even though we might have been fired after our last game before the Olympics, it's such an intriguing story, but it's the essence of that's what goes on at highly competitive levels. So really good stuff. And I'm wondering if anybody's got any thoughts in the back of their mind here, because I've always advocated that the females are going to change the game. And Angie, in your book, there's a few pages there where you mention that the only way it's going to change is through women.
You've
Whether
read the
it's
book. You've read the book more recently than I have. I must have been fired up about something. I don't know. I think it was some of the women, a lot of the women academics writing about hockey and the need for change. A lot of that stuff is coming from women.
well, I've shared an email, and I may share it again after this to sort of highlight it. I've got your book here, and would have to find the pages, but it's a paragraph there that really exemplifies the dilemma in the game today. And it's a man's game, and it's a man's society, the business leadership. You look at it, and I really believe that the role of women is the role that will make a difference in every facet, and not just in sports, but in leadership, politics, society, business, you name it. The X and O side, or the business side of things, and the knowledge of the job you have just isn't as important as your people skills. And I think that part of it is really important. And I've mentioned before, the first team in the NHL that hires a female coach to be on the staff just for the presence and the courage of that person. And I look at Vicky Sonahara, and I don't know what role she's got, but I believe there's 3 other guys on that staff. She's a little outnumbered, but the ability of her to say what she thinks is going to be very important, because everyone needs to hear it. And that's the bottom line. And I felt I could say what I thought when I coached with Danielle and and Melody, and I felt good about that. We had conversations, and we trusted and respected one another because of that. But I'm really glad that we've been able to meet and talk. And Bob, I really appreciate your connection with the real hockey world, because like yourself, we grew up in it, playing and coaching. And the women are bringing a new light to the game that I think will make it better sooner than later. Now, Rick, as usual, you're the quiet guy in the group, and I saw a typo come in about Montreal. We'll talk about that later. I'd sure like to hear that. Rick, your observation, sitting back, and maybe introduce yourself a bit to Angie in terms of your background, because you're a regular here, okay?
Okay, thanks, Wally. Just by way of introduction, I consider myself a career minor hockey coach, one of the bad guys. I did read your book, Angie.
Thank you.
I've just basically been absorbing this morning, but on the topic of head coaches that don't have experience, I'm one of those guys. I didn't get to play junior. I didn't quite make it on my first go around. I educated myself to be a much better hockey player after the fact. But one thing I found very useful as I progressed through the ranks was I always, or at least I learned, it wasn't always, but I learned to bring in staff members that had that experience, that the players could relate to, and more importantly, that could educate me as to just what the environment were. Because at the AA, AAA male side, you're preparing kids that want to go to that level. So it's always been important to me to give them some advanced knowledge of what they should expect and how they should be prepared to conduct themselves in those environments. So having a good support staff, and as a head coach, listening to that support staff, you still have the authority or the right to make a decision based on it, but you should be making that decision based on all available information, not just on your own experiences or your own preferences. So I'll just add that to the conversation for now. Other than that, I'm just enjoying what's being transmitted back and forth.
Now, one of the things, Angie, about Rick, he is like the coach that didn't get to coach in your community. You write about him in your book.
He lives
But he
right
up-
across the street from me, this coach.
Right.
I could look out
But
my window and wave.
Rick's ability to survive in the system was based upon his delivery of the code of conduct and communication of it to the parent group and walking the talk consistently all year about what that code would be. And everything that that he said he was going to do was for the good of the game and the good of the kids in terms of their life skills. And he was able to deliver that package and deliver that code of conduct, which incidentally for everybody, the code of conduct is probably given 15 minutes of attention in a coach education clinic. And they're handed a template out about what to do and what to deliver on it. But that's where I've talked to Rick over the years about supplementing it with the mission statement exercise, because the code of conduct is reinforcing your mission statement and how you're going to do things. So thanks very much, Rick. Anybody else got anything to add?
Wally, I was just going to add to that about, kind of piggybacking on with how Rick approaches things. I would say in the Toronto environment, I've approached coaching junior very differently than the majority of the junior coaches. And it's all about the culture and the experience and, giving the players tools they can use at the next level and not focused on winning. We certainly focus or, want to win, but we're focused on the process. And I am definitely an outlier compared to most of the coaches at the junior level. And I think coaches are hesitant to take that road that, I won't necessarily put myself at the same tier as Rick, like he has a lot more experience than I do, but there is a place for coaches like us because there are parents who are looking for that. And I think I've seen a lot of minor hockey coaches maybe take the easier road, which is like win at all costs, cutthroat mentality, whatever, because that's the normal path. Or right now that's the expected path, or that's what parents are asking about. And it does take, people like Rick to kind of change that culture and have people be able to say, wait a second, we could do this differently. Is there an option for my son or daughter to be in a different environment? And I think a lot of that, like you said, Wally, lies on the coaches. I mean, coach education needs to change. There's no question about that. But I think, as a coach, you have a choice of how you want to approach it, what your values are, which way you're going to go down the moral pathway. And it's not an easier pathway. Don't get me wrong. I could promise things, overpromise and underdeliver, and let players pay for free and take money under the table. All those options are there, but I've chosen not to. And as a result, I have this great culture because people know I'm different, and then they come. Like the families that come to me have pre-selected me. They're not coming to me expecting a win at all costs mentality or cutthroat, or they know, like your former players and parents are your best advertisers, right? So one of the things I've been most proud of is the number of sisters I have, younger sisters of older sisters who've come through my program, right? If I was a jerk or an idiot or didn't know what I was doing, there's no way mom and dad would send the younger one to play here too. So, I applaud Rick and a lot of the coaches that are on this call of choosing to do it differently, because it has to be an active choice and you have to be willing to go against the normal and realize that that's going to maybe somewhat limit the people you get. But this reminds me of, going way back to the beginning of the conversation when we were talking about coaching at academies. And I used to run the girls hockey program at Peak, which is where Connor McDavid went. And so I got to see Connor since he was 10 years old. I actually have an autograph from him when he's 10 years old. You can imagine what that looks like. But he was that good back then. And, like the dream for a coach is to get a Connor McDavid, or I've had some female players like that who Connor would go on the ice with anybody. He would, like Sammy said, with hockey schools, like Connor would go on the ice with the 9-year-old kids and show them how to do stuff, or, be that role model. And I've had plenty of players who are the same way, as opposed to, I can only be on the ice with the other AAA kids, or the other guys who play on the Marlies with me or whatever. So I think, you know, if you get the right coach leading the program, you might get some players like that who are, you know, supernatural hockey players who also happen to be amazing humans. And then, you know, your culture kind of takes care of itself. But I think that's, you know, the dream environment to shoot for. But if you don't have coaches that are willing to do it the right way, then you're probably not attracting those great people. You're going to get, if you want to be a jerk, you're going to attract other jerks, right? So I tried to do it that way. It's made my life at the rink pretty easy. I don't get a lot of drama and parents yelling at me and all that good stuff, which is always fun to avoid when you go to work.
Yeah,
Oh, sorry. I'm just going to jump in to say that I need to go. I have an 11 o'clock Swim Canada meeting about how the meeting's titled How to Return to Competition Post-COVID. So it sounds like they're getting a little bit ahead of themselves, but I want to hear what they're going to say. But thank you all so much. It's been really interesting listening to you. And Kim, I'm all in favor of no drama. I said, if this is the swim club, if you want drama, the drama club's at the art station. We're not doing that here. So, and Bob, you gave me an idea when you just way back when you said about handicapping the swimmers when we race, so we can still race. We do that like in terms of taking time off after and posting results. But I just thought while we were talking, we could start them at a handicap, right? So the girl who does a 28-second 50 free can leave 3 seconds before the boy who does a 25-second 50 free, and that would be super fun. I never even thought of that. So thank you. I'm going to do that soon.
Thank you, Angie. I think we all loved it.
Yes, very good.
I really appreciate it. So thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye, Angie. Thank you very much.
I wanted to make a comment about why do kids play sports, or why do adults play sports? Why do they play? What's the main reason?
Fun.
Fun, exactly. It's fun. And I think every coach needs to take that direction with their kids. I'll go back a little bit in the conversation when we talked about parent coaches. I didn't coach my kids. I made that a conscious decision. I shouldn't say that. I did coach my one son in lacrosse because they could not get a coach. And it was the only reason I coached was in lacrosse. But I made a conscious decision. I didn't want to coach my kids because hockey or whatever sport they were playing, baseball, lacrosse, was their fun place. And they didn't need their dad who was telling them to clean their room, do their dishes, cut the grass, shovel the snow, to then go to their fun space and tell them what to do there as well. I felt that they needed parent support and a place for fun. So I made that conscious decision not to coach my own kids. My kids were good enough athletes that they were going to play regardless of who was coaching, and they didn't always have great coaches, but for the most part, they had coaches that cared about them. And that's all I really cared about, was that they went there, had a good time, learned to play the game, learn life skills, which I think it's always about, is life skills right through pro hockey. It's not just from little kids. So I think the biggest thing that a lot of coaches miss out on is if these kids are coming here to have fun. And if it's not fun, why do they want to be there? And if it's not fun, they're not going to learn. So I really think that we have to take a real hard look at what our coaches are doing with our kids and whether they are really fun or they're just going because mom and dad are taking them.
Thank you, Bob. I think that was very well said. And I'm just going to say goodbye to everyone. Thanks for celebrating my birthday with me.
Happy birthday.
happy birthday.
Thank you.
I've got a question that kind of puzzles me about the women's hockey culture, because I replaced a coach who the girls ganged up on, did a 14-page complaint, and I replaced her after Christmas. And I know that the Inferno did the same thing with their coach. They kind of got her gassed. And I know when Michelle, the same thing at U of L, and it doesn't seem to happen at men's hockey, that guys, organize themselves and really go after coaches. And it's just kind of, well, I'm just wondering why it happens at the female level much more than it does at the male level. Any thoughts?
Well, you're gonna have to turn your mic on, I think, for me to hear what other people are saying on the call, please.
Okay, good.
Thanks.
Tom, can you repeat the question? Sorry, I was just parenting for a moment.
Well, I was basically talking about
No, I can't.
Michelle's situation in U of L. That
Yes.
it's not,
You hear it
I
now?
wasn't talking about her specifically, but
Yes.
you know Michelle. And the same thing, I took over at SAIT, the same thing happened. The girls got together and they went after the coach and did a 14-page complaint thing, and you know, she ended up getting released, and Mike Kennedy and I took over, and now I'm coaching them. And I know the Inferno did the same thing to the girl that coached in the Olympics there, and they got rid of her. And I've heard it going on in other places, and I'm just wondering, because I can't think of male teams that have done that sort of thing. And it just seems to be something that, you know.
Well, I think it's a great point, because I don't know that if it was a male doing it, that people would view any behavior, they would view the behavior differently. I know Michelle's case very well because she's coaches with me now, and we used to coach together in Ryerson, and she's taking over the junior team for me next year. But knowing, you know, the nitty gritty of her case, you know, the first red flag that goes up to me is, if a guy did this, would anybody have a red flag about this? Would a parent get up in arms if it was a male doing it? Is it because it's a female saying these things or acting in such a way, and it seems out of, you know, the typical female character, that people are judging them this way as a result? So I'm only really familiar with Michelle's case, specifically. Just so everyone knows, actually, all the charges have been dropped against her in the university. So that just happened last week. So basically, it's all been dropped. It's been dropped from her, and the athletic director have been seen as not doing anything wrong. I guess it's still at the university level, but I do think there is a double standard. I think if I act in a certain way that people don't associate, you know, with a female typically acting, if I act more like what we see a stereotypical male hockey coach acting like, they will get up in arms about that. Whereas if I was a male doing it, they'd be less likely to get up in arms about it or take me to task on it. I do believe that's true. I do think we get held to an incredibly high standard, you know, and at the minor hockey level, right? Especially.
Gotta interrupt you there, Kim, for a sec. Is because this year, the last month of the season, what I did is I benched one of the in-crowd girls, you know, one of the popular girls, because she acted like an idiot and stuff like this. And then she didn't come to the game that she was supposed to. So I didn't play her the next night. Well, there was an absolutely different feel to the team the rest of the season. And, you know, like, guys would just understand why, you know, you got benched because of the way you acted and the way you played, and et cetera, et cetera. So it just kind of puzzles me. So I don't know if it's just a male thing or if it's a particular group of players.
No, I take, like I say, because I'm coaching, like I'm a female coaching at this level, and the majority of the other coaches are male. I've seen, you know, some of the other female coaches get suspended, you know, all these sort of things. You know, they have an outburst on the bench, they get a 10-game suspension. If a male coach has the same kind of outburst, they're getting no suspension. Like it's almost like people are they're so not used to seeing us in those positions that we're under a microscope, and anything that we do that doesn't fit their traditional feeling of how a female should act, even if I mirrored exactly how the typical male coach did it, I would be judged unfairly as a result. And I'm not saying that's good or bad. I'm just saying that's the truth. Now, I also believe coaches have to be authentic in who they are. So, you know, if you're warmer and fuzzier, that's your road. If you're, a little tougher, that's your road. I do think there's a place for that, and the coaches need to own that. But I've seen a lot of females take up that male persona, thinking that that's their way to the elite levels, or that's the way to get it done. And maybe with a lot of them, it's because they've never had a female coach in their entire hockey career. So that's what they're mirroring. But I do think when we do mirror those less desirable behaviors, I'm not saying all the traits of a male coach, but I think everyone on this call knows what I mean when I say, what that traditional old school male hockey coach is like. When we do mirror that, and that may be all that we're used to, we are judged differently as a result. I can tell you that for sure, because I've had parents and players say that to me, at this level, that it's different coming from a female than from a male if we're going to act in that way. So, if that's changing minds or if that's just the way it is, so be it. But I do have that soft spot for it, especially after what I've seen Michelle go through, and I'm happy it turned out the right way for her. As a result of the process, it's too bad she had to deal with it for 2 years after the lawsuit happened. But the good guy won in this case.
That's good to hear that.
Kim, I'd like to mention my experience with the national program. Now, this is a generalization. And I had the conversation with Lisa yesterday. She's coached in the program. I've seen coaches replaced with a month before the Olympics. And we were almost going to be replaced before Salt Lake City. And the players appear to be running the show when it comes to that, in terms of coach selection, I believe, and coaches being good enough to finish the job. And that's my experience, is that, and Lisa shared it with me, she feels that the players shouldn't run the show. Their input needs to be heard, but the pressure on the players and the judgment, the players judging the coaches, and having been coached by men, I'm wondering if the staff isn't selected with four men and Vicky because of that, where the decision making comes from on that. So I'm really curious about that kind of a problem when it comes to the female game and coaching females. And Tom, you created a pretty good, healthy culture. And you're not a typical male coach in terms of shouting and yelling in the male minor hockey game, but I believe that males have more respect to begin with than females would coaching females at that level. I'm not sure, but
I think Wally too. I think a lot of people just haven't seen. Like, I was fortunate. I had in my minor hockey experience, I had Steph White as one of my head coaches at Leaside, and she's a national team level coach, and my college hockey coach was female, but those were really the only two coaches I had, but both very high level, respectable female coaches. But as I've evolved through coaching women's hockey and playing, the majority of female players have not had female coaches. They just haven't. And so, that's an interesting way to look at it. If all these Olympians have grown up being coached by guys, and that's what they respond to, or that's what they're familiar with, I can understand then, that maybe having a bench full of females doesn't seem to resonate with them. I also think, that's part of the challenge when Hockey Canada says we're going to have all former players. I don't know how Danielle dealt with it at the more recent Olympics when she was coaching people who she played with, but that would be awfully challenging as well, to coach your former teammate in that program. But no, that's an interesting point, and I don't take for granted that I had two female coaches, and that seems like a lot growing up, and that's probably a lot for most women who've played at an elite level too. It shouldn't be that way, by the way. It's just the way it is right now.
Tom, you coached Mount Royal, and you've coached AAA midget girls and AA midget girls. You've also worked with the guys. Um, what's the difference?
Geez, I don't know. It depends. I think it's really depends on the group. You know, like I enjoy coaching people that want to get better and want to learn, whether they're male or female. You know, and I guess it's a starting point. Like when I was 2018, 19, I was helping coach the men. And so you know, the skill level is quite a bit higher. You know, they've all played junior A or major junior. Then the girls, and the state girls weren't that great. And I don't know, that the girls seem to catch on to younger ages, you know, the concepts a little quicker. But I don't think there's that much difference. You know, like Bob said, if you have a relationship with them and get to know them a little bit, it you know, it makes a huge difference. Knowing a little bit about what's going on in the life, and I'm going to diverge a little and talk about when I taught. I taught in a Catholic school, and we'd have a prayer at the start of the day, and we go around and everybody could make their own intention, and kids would be, you know, praying for their mother who has cancer, or somebody's going through this part, or they'd say it in front of the class when we say a prayer. And then the school decided they're just going to have one over the microphone instead of class. And I know I lost a lot of personal understanding of the kids, you know, what they're going through. And I think, like either guys or girls, if you do what Bob said, you kind of talk to them and say, how's it going? And so it's not just all hockey. It just seems to me that the girls will group together and support themselves if they think they're being done wrong by, and kind of group together a lot more than the boys would, you know, to go against the coach or this kind of thing.
I've got limited experience with girls. I'll be honest with you. I've probably ran 12 practices, and I think I coached 2 games for a coach that wasn't able to be there, and he needed a certified coach on the bench. So, but my observation would be this: with limited experience, I think with the girls, when I tried to demonstrate something and asked them to do something, they tried very hard to do what you asked them to do. They wanted to learn, they wanted to get better, and I think collectively they seem to be more in tune with what they were being asked to do, as opposed to where the guys just sometimes just go off and start doing a drill and willy-nilly, and you got to stop it and correct it. I really found that with the girls, they really wanted, they were there for the right purpose. They were there wanting to learn, to get better, and to play. The game situation I found totally different is where they couldn't make in-game adjustments, and these were midget AAA girls. They didn't make in-game adjustments very well. If you ask them, you know, like change something a little bit, I didn't find that very. Like they didn't seem to adjust as well to situations, and I don't know if that's normal at that age, because like I said, I don't have much experience. Certainly the skill level is not the same as the skill level of a 17-year-old boy or a 16-year-old boy in most cases, and that's probably just because of a lack of coaching at the younger ages and as they move up. And I really found that the girls' deportment was totally different than guys, and I don't know what it's supposed to be, but I was shocked.
You know, I wonder, Dean, in all your hockey experience, and in Europe, Romania, Hungary, wherever you were, speak to the female side of things and what you've experienced in your lifetime of female hockey, and knowing where it's going and what's happening where you've been around the world, or has it totally been men's and boys hockey?
No, I started coaching female hockey in about 2003 with the Dinos. So I was there for 3 years. I preceded Goyette. It was a really good experience overall. I was pleasantly surprised. I would echo what Bob has said. The girls really seemed to be keen to try to please. They were very willing learners. And what I learned from them was I needed to be much better prepared than a guys coach. They would always ask the questions about the why. And it made me a better coach. I was very grateful for the 3 years I had at the U of C. It made me a much better coach. And I think afterwards I became a parent, oh boy, probably 6-7 years later. And being a parent really helped me as a coach. And I think overall, Wally, like that was the only 3 years I had direct coaching with a team in the female side. But I worked with Hockey Alberta for, oh geez, I don't know how many cycles with Alberta Winter Games, mentoring the female coaches and going through that process with them. You know, when I was doing it on the guys' side as well. But I enjoyed working with the females. And overseas, I think it depends on the country where you're at. This morning while I was out walking, I was listening to the 31 Thoughts podcast, Elliot Friedman, Jeff Merritt. They released it today. It's only 37 minutes, but it has to do with what's going on with the PWPHA and the, what do they call it, the NWHL. This weekend there's going to be a final, the NWHL, but it was more about the kind of what's been going on with the two leagues back in the day and potential NHL involvement. And it kind of presents, I guess, from a pro or a semi-pro outlook, what's going on in the female game. Over in Europe, I think it depends on the country. Like I said, in Romania, there was very disorganized as far as the female side went. There's not a lot of opportunity. There's not a lot of marketing on that side. I think we could have done a lot better job. I was trying to push some inroads there, but I was only there for a year. Fortunately, Peter Bolin's over there right now, and he was a former assistant coach with Team Sweden on the women's side as well. And he was a former player for Sweden, just about made their national junior team and played, NCAA over here. He's had a lot of experience. It's Iceland all over. So he's working with a little bit of the female model in mind, and he and I have had several discussions about that. In Hungary, it's much better. It's better funded, better organized. In South Korea, it was, it was pretty slim. I mean, when they brought me in there to prepare for the Olympics, like it was at 8 years out, they were a long ways away. I think we had a total of 45 females registered in the entire country. Like how do you go to war against Goliath when you're that? Incredible base building job that had to occur in South Korea, and it's still happening. And I don't know to what level, because I've been gone several years there now. But at least we got it up to the level with the planning stage to please the IHF and the IOC to allow them to participate as a host country in men's and women's hockey. I think in Scandinavia, when I've been over there, it's again, it's much more advanced. It's ahead of Hungary. Germany was ahead. I mean, you just look at the IHF rankings, Wally, and what I look for when I go down the rankings is I look at the population of players, because when you see you have a larger pool of players, by default, you're going to have probably a better program, a better funded program, more organization. There's more interest. There's more marketability. But at the end of the day, you've got to build something from the grassroots up. And I think I came into the conversation here late. I didn't hear what Kim was saying, but I think there's still a male perspective on the game, because it's mainly a male game, in the sense that you look at the number of participants and who's making the decisions. They're males. And I think, there's got to be continued growth and progress in it. And I think that the females have to step up and do what they can for their side to argue their cases, and more males have to listen to them. Now, today I was really taken aback by the one question I think Jeff Merrick asked this gal he was interviewing today, and he said, just what do the females want? The PWHPA, the NWHL, what does female hockey want in this pro model? And they were interviewing a sports writer who's covered the league for several years, also with the Boston Bruins, very knowledgeable gal. And in about a 5 to 10 minute reply, she could not succinctly and with clarity tell Jeff and Elliot what's the end game here. So to me, if there's no clarity on either side of the equation, PWHPA or NWHL or NHL, it just seems like there's a lot of bluster and no real purposeful intent to move toward something. It just seems like everything's all over the map. But now this is from a 37-minute interview today. I'm not an expert on this. I don't follow it. It's not my realm. But in my background of coaching females at university for 3 years and then dealing with them from a federation and NSO and NGB level, IHF level, as I've traveled around coaching, what I see is a lack of investment and a lack of clarity of purpose on how do they want to grow the game and how do they want to organize the game and how do they want to staff the game. So that's my take.
Good points. Excellent points, Dean. Now, getting back to grassroots, Rick Puttock, you've coached minor hockey in Strathmore females. That was the first time that you coached females?
Not counting the odd one or two along the way that were playing on boys' teams, yes. A full female team, yeah.
What the experience that you had with all females in minor hockey, did you take anything away from that, having spent most of your coaching days on the male side?
The most striking thing is in sync with what Bob was saying, is that they asked the why. Dean echoed the same comment. And my analysis of that, good, bad, or otherwise, was that they didn't have a history of ingrained habits and understandings that you had to try to override and or correct. They were quite curious as to what they needed to know and what they needed to do and why they needed to do it. And once you explained all that, they give it their best effort to make it happen, irregardless of their skill level.
It's an interesting observation because I include something in for me is that, they, having been a bench coach and a hockey camp coach, like I'm both. So I do skills and I only teach girls skills and I only have female instructors. So even in Toronto, which some might argue is the epicenter of women's hockey, I am the only one who only works with girls. I'm the only camp that only works with girls and only has female instructors, which I find striking. I'm sure it might be different in Boston or Minnesota or maybe even Calgary, other bigger centers of women's hockey. But it's interesting because even at the hockey camp and skills instructor level, the majority of skills instructors are male and the majority of hockey camps are boys with a few girls, right? The majority. And so when I teach my hockey camps, I teach a lot of the why because I've only ever coached girls, bench and skills, so I don't know any different. And they eat it up, but sometimes, people come to my hockey camps for the first time and they see a lot more teaching and explaining of concepts and not just like I think Daryl calls it like the sweat test, right? Just like go, 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 go. And we do that too. But I'm trying to teach those concepts because as a bench coach, I know those concepts are not necessarily ingrained at a young age with those players. So I'm trying to do it in the hockey camp setting, but it looks very different than what I might see just walking into any six pad in Toronto, where all the other instructors are guys teaching guys, right? So even our hockey skills instruction looks a little different I'm certainly keying in on the things that the girls are weaker at, or the things that I've seen in the female game that they need to work on more so than, what might need to be worked on in the male side of the game, just in generalization. But that's an interesting observation, because I hadn't thought of it until you guys mentioned it, kind of the hockey camp side of it, and having, being a different product that way too. We don't even run hockey camps the same way because it's all girls, right? They do, they want the why. Sometimes they're so used to going to hockey camps that are run by males that are more that like go, 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 and not a lot of explanation. I'm generalizing here. I know that's not always the case. And so some of them you can kind of see, even when they come to my hockey camps, it's weird. It's weird they have a female instructor. It's weird everyone else is a female on the ice. And it's weird because I'm teaching it very differently than what they're used to. So I'm happy no one else is running an all-female camp with all-female instructors. I'm happy to corner the market on that. But it's striking to me how different it is. But again, I've not coached on the guys' side very much, so I really don't know how it's done differently. I just get it from, the parents saying to me, or the players saying to me, oh, this is so much different than camp X or Y that I went to, or coach X or Y that I played for. So it's, I guess I'm seeing it from a different angle.
Has anybody heard any feedback on Haley Wickenheiser and Coyne? Is that her name with Chicago? Doing skill development. Have they heard any feedback as to how that's being received by the players, or how it's been going for them?
I haven't heard anything. I'd be curious how much, kudos to Haley. She's in med school. I can't imagine she's doing.
She's got to be so busy. It's unbelievable.
And I have no idea I don't know Kendall personally, so I would have no clue. But I guess my hope in seeing them in those roles is that it's not just a token role. That's the challenge, right? With the
right.
females is you want your foot in the door, but if you're just given a token role, and clearly Coyne and Wickenheiser can do more than a token role. Right. But I hope they're not just there to be there, to have their
that was my curiosity. Are they there just to be there? Is it a politically correct thing to be doing for inclusion, or are they actually getting to do their job, and how is it being received by the players? That was more what my curiosity was.
Well, that's the challenge, right? Is if they're token and put in that role and not necessarily given that opportunity, then of course eventually the Maple Leafs or the Blackhawks will say, yeah, we tried it, it didn't really work, right? So it's a question of how much buy-in there is from the organizational level. I just, knowing what Haley's doing with med school and all that, I can't imagine she's there
very much.
That much, but in a COVID year, it would probably look different too.
Right. Like the NFL is starting to employ more and more women in specific positions as on-field coaches. So, and I know in some cases it seems to have gone fairly well, but.
Yeah, I think Wally's observation about, I think the real tipping point will be once you get a female on the bench at the NHL level.
Exactly.
And until that,
I think it's coming, but it's going to be somebody like a Haley Wickenheiser if that's what she wants to do. Has she got enough coaching experience? I guess would be the next question there. But I think before you see a female on the bench in the NHL, I think you need to see more females running national team programs around the world. I think that's where it's going to come from.
Well, I think you're also going to have to see females coaching men, which is very rare at any level in hockey.
Right.
It's extremely rare. And Corey Chevry, who's currently with Hockey Canada, is the assistant coach at Ryerson men's. So she's probably got the inside track if she wanted to go that way and get on a professional bench. She's probably, based on people I know, I'm sure there's many other women who are looking for that type of opportunity. But to me, Corey would be the one who at least is on the path because she's already coaching on the men's side of the game, right? Again, I do think if, for example, if that was an opportunity I wanted to have, I think it would be a knock against me that I have only coached girls, right? Like I don't have, my perspective would be valuable. I know what I'm doing, but I haven't coach on the guy's side. So I do think there has to be like that in between, that go between. There has to be more doors open for women to coach at, the OHL level, or, the major junior level at, anywhere in Canada, or, AHL, that sort of thing. I've just not heard of anybody, which is a little bit shocking when you look at, football and soccer and basketball. Like, you just don't see it in hockey.
Moose Jaw Warriors have a female assistant coach.
Oh, do they?
I was going to suggest that.
Oh,
Yeah.
awesome. Yeah, again, I'm not aware of it, but those things need to be celebrated. Like, if I don't know that, there's no way anyone knows that, right? Like, beyond people who are, in that universe. Like, these are the types of things that need to be, because we're seeing more on the management side of it, the business side of it, the scouting side of it. But the coaching side of it, I think, that's short of a woman actually playing in NHL. And we all saw how that, that's unlikely to ever happen. But, the coaching is sort of the next best thing to being in the show. I think that's going to be the tipping point.
Kim, I just want, Bob, I wanted to share a story about Haley. I talked to her about what she does with Toronto. And, I'm just not sure how much she's involved, but she is working with them. She's been on ice at practices, and she's worked with Daryl, and they're very good friends and communicate a lot. But she did share with me, she got to run a practice with the Leafs, a team, like run a practice. And she said the players were just a pleasure to work with. They respected her, and everything she did, everything she had to offer. And she came away feeling really good about that. And my impression is just who she is going to gain attention. And then her ability to communicate, read them, that's something that a coach learns in terms of what you do, whether you're female or male. And I really think that's the ability of a coach, is their ability in the end to listen and learn. And what women do is they listen and they learn. And as coaches, they would be able to get players to listen and learn. Where with guys, it's old school, my way, the highway. This is the way we're going to do things, and never asking them questions. So that's the one thing I can share, and that's where I feel the game is going to change, where the men that are involved with the national team, I believe, are not into a questioning mode to the degree that women could be. And I think the game's going to go that way. It's going to change on the male and female side. And when you look at, and Bob, I throw this at you, the turnover of NHL coaching staffs is primarily because I believe they have to let the players coach them. What do they think? What do they feel? What do they want? And Kim, Darryl Belfry's book, he learns from the players. And at that level, their years of experience playing and truly engaging and listening to them in a sincere way, that could be the future of successful coaching in the NHL that would provide a more lasting career. Because right now, boy, it is just unpredictable. The pressure of winning.
Well, I don't disagree with you, Wally, but I think somewhere in there's going to be a fine line to walk between the inmates running the asylum, right? If you get a very highly paid player and he's not happy with the coach, well, you know who's leaving. It's not the player. Yeah, and you're going to have to be really careful with. I think players have to have input into everything around the team. It is their team. It's not the coach's team. It's the players' team. It's not the owner's team. And I think the players have to have input into all aspects, whether it's their travel schedule, their practice schedule, what they want pregame, morning skates or not. Like there's a multitude of things that I think players could have input into. But I also don't think that the players should get to the point where they are actually telling the team what they're going to do. I think there's a balancing act there somewhere, but
I just want you to understand where I'm coming
from. But coaches don't listen. What you're talking about is I don't think coaches do listen, and there's lots of examples of that. And usually those guys are short shelf guys, right? They get a year and a half, 2.5 years max, and they're moving on because they are, for lack of a better word, they're bullies, right? Like you said, it's the highway, it's my way or the highway, and I think that's very short term.
Yeah. Yeah, my point, Bob, is that, and I really believe this because of the turnovers, it's not just the players and coach, it's the players and coaching staff and management and scouting. It's the organizational culture that you create in the way you do things. That's the most important thing. And players have to be a part of the culture that you want.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to engage them in a way. It's not that the inmates run the asylum. That happens in minor hockey.
Yeah, it does.
It's but to say the players run the teams, it doesn't happen. But they're not getting results. Daryl Sutter jumping in his way.
That's lately, yes. See, Wally, that's where I think
ability to engage the players, what you think and what they think, to buy into the best way to deal with the environment and culture you've got.
Right. See, I think that's where a female coach.
I think that's something that women have an ability,
right?
Because coaching them, as Rick said, and Dean said, they want to learn. They think. Guys want to be told what to do, and they're used to it. And I think if you need smarter hockey players, you have to get them to think. And like getting them to think, you have to listen to them.
Well, exactly.
Ask them questions.
See, I think that's where a female coach would have a big advantage on a male coach is they have, I think women in general have more empathy. And I think they're more willing to listen and find out like what is bothering you, like what is your issue here, and listen. Where men will go, get over it, sort of thing, right? So that's where I think women have a huge advantage on men. And I honestly think that a lot of the minor hockey programs should almost make it mandatory that there's at least one female coach on the teams. And I think the female coaches should have a male coach too. Not saying a head coach, but somebody that's willing to support a female head coach. I think there's two different points of view that I think the players can benefit from.
Yeah, I agree. I've had some great male assistants. Ironically, the refs always think they're the head coach when I have a male assistant. Every time. I'm always the assistant when there's a man on my bench with me. But no, I agree. I do think sometimes, our association kind of swung towards we have to have all females at the elite level, the AA level here, and I caution them to say that that's fine if that's the direction you want to go, but you have to make sure that the support staff and the other people involved, have. Again, I'm more concerned about the parental perspective because I'm in minor hockey. So whether they're male or female, I do think that, there's a value to have a parent on those benches who, not necessarily a parent of one of the players, but someone who is a parent who could provide that different perspective. But, I'm certainly not, it's hard, right? Because I would personally rather take a female with less experience than a male with more experience because I want to help develop that female as a coach. Now you question, you go, is that the best thing for my players or my team? You know, would they be better served by having a male who's coached a lot longer? Perhaps. But where is that girl going to get that experience? Where is she going to get that mentorship then if I don't take her in to give her that experience? So that, you know, again, that's where I've sort of put my stick in the sand to say this is where what I'm going to do and help sort of launch these women off into, you know, their coaching career. But, you know, I've had nothing but great experiences, you know, having male assistants. I just, you know, I have to do it. I believe for myself with what I do that I have to help be a catalyst for more women to get that opportunity. And I need to be, I need my players to see an all-female staff, and I need the parents of my players to see an all-female staff. And again, it's a rarity in women's hockey to have, you know, it's rare to have a female head coach in women's hockey, which is shocking enough, but to have an all-female bench is almost unheard of. So being in Toronto and having, you know, so many former players who are interested in coaching, I think it's silly for me personally to do it another way. But that's, again, that's my, you know, I think part of my role as being a coach mentor is to have them learn from me and then move on.
So being a devil's advocate here, are you not doing the same thing that the males are doing? They're eliminating females from their staff, and you're eliminating males from your staff.
I'm not eliminating them. I completely agree with you. I'm not saying it's the right way to do it, but I do think I have to lead, you know, in terms of showing more women in those roles. And I don't think everyone has the opportunity to do that. You know, in the GTA we do. There's so many former players who've come back who want to coach, who could use some mentoring from a coach who's been there for doing it for a long time. So, you know, if you know, 10 years from now, I'd probably do it very differently. But I do think we're in an interesting time here in Toronto where, you know, I do need to do a bit of that to help, you know, move players along. The junior coach who's taking over next year has at least one, she might have two males on her bench, and I have no problem with that. This is just for me personally, you know, a unique opportunity that I have in the short term that I'm going to take advantage of.
I think that's a good idea, Kim, to give people experience. I have a heck of a time getting female coaches because one day we practice at 4:30 and the other one 6:15. Well, 4:30, they're all working, and driving through the city to get there is really difficult. So I had one girl last year who was teaching the south end of the city, and Sate's right in the middle. So of course you're driving in the traffic. And she was supposed to be there twice a week, but most of the time ended up being there once a week. And yeah, it's just, it's tough the way you know,